is that we have to remember zakat is an entire system. And so there are questions on what kind of wealth, who is collecting it, what's the nature of the person collecting. There's questions on distribution, which really what people are most interested in. So I'm going to focus on that. It ties to other chapters in fiqh, which deal with political theory, which maybe we can and should touch on as well. It's not lying floating. It's not just about what do I have to give, let me give it. The classical fiqh talks really about the entire vision, and within their discussions, there's an economic theory, there's a theory of items of ownership. So it's a really fascinating, broad topic.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to the IFG podcast. With me today I have a very special guest, Sh Sohail Hanif, who is the CEO of National Zakat Foundation. Sh Sohail, you've studied for a decade in Jordan. You've also done your PhD in Islamic legal theory from Oxford. You taught at Cambridge Muslim College for a number of years. I'm a student of yours, as is Khidr from the team as well. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Sheikh Sohail, we're going to get into the practicalities of NZF and what it does on the ground towards the end of the podcast. But what I wanted to do first was really just unpick some of the more theoretical kind of frontier lands of zakat and give our community an exploration of zakat in a way that I don't think is usually done in our community, really exploring what are the different categories of zakat, what is the point of zakat, all of that kind of thing. And I guess to start off with a live example of when zakat was perhaps pushed, out from the familiar safe ground, was NZF back in 2018. Can you talk us through that?
So just give a few starters to explain what your question is, first of all, to the audience. So I've been with NZF as CEO since 2021. NZF has been in operation since 2011. For the whole of these approximately 13 years, the focus of National Zakat Foundation in dispersing zakat funds has been exclusively on what fits within the spheres of poverty relief, economic empowerment. Poverty relief, helping someone in need just to get by. Economic empowerment, helping someone struggling to stand on their own 2 feet. For about a year and a half, and again, I wasn't working at NZF at the time, but I did have a 1-year stint in 2015, 2016 in research and development. So I've kind of caught the two ends of the conversation. So for about a year and a half, there was a strategy which centered on broadening slightly the expenditure of zakat. I say slightly because the majority of the funds in that period was still on poverty relief and economic empowerment. But a fraction of the funds, I think it was about 15% or so, was spent on something else. That something else was drawing from quite a large classical fiqh heritage, that the purpose of zakat was not only to do with poverty relief, but it also had another angle, which was about promoting Islam, you could say, in society, using categories like fi sabilillah, which we'll come to talk to anyway, about those in the way of God. So the idea was that some of the community's zakat should be spent on people who are going to represent Islam articulately, intelligently, favorably, impactfully, in a way that Muslims and Islam can thrive in this country. So part of it would be on scholars who can, again, spread quality scholarship of Islam, and part would be on maybe what you might call activists, people who can represent Islam capably in various forms of public life. That's the essence. It lasted for, like I said, about a year and a half. As an approach, it was discontinued.
Yeah, because the context, I guess, for our viewers is it upset a lot of people, right? There was a lot of hoo-ha around it. What do you think was where did that come from? What was the aggro about?
Yeah, it's something I'd be happy to explore with you in the course of our discussions today. But just in brief, for now, my analysis, and again, I wasn't there at the time, is it comes down to some inherent challenges when a representative community body is using collected funds as zakat for the purposes I've just outlined, for promoting particular selected leaders. So I think there are inherent challenges in this, whoever undertakes this. Part of the inherent challenges is, what is a good scholar? What is a good leader? Someone who I think is intelligent, you might think is quite unimpressive. Someone who I think is on the sunnah, you might think he's on the bid'ah. Someone who I think did a really good stand in parliament, you say, yeah, but they voted on X, Y, Z things that are really bad for us. So it's almost, there's an inherent challenge in anyone who's going to take a very large public fund as opposed to a small pot from, you know, a small group of people who've aligned on a particular purpose, but just a very large public pot. There's an inherent challenge in who are you to state so-and-so is a good representative for our community. There's another inherent challenge in such a proposition, which is, what are you paying people for? So you're a great scholar, I like your project, I'm going to support you for a year, but what are you going to do in the year that would make this community public pot suitably spent? You know, can we stipulate something on recipients of zakat to do something? Another question we can engage with. Another question, which I think is inherent in such a project, is what is the exact nature of the relationship between what I'm simply calling this community pot, or the administrative community pot, and the givers? What say do the givers have in the expenditure of that pot? Again, I'm quite interested to explore this with you further as well, because are you representatives of the giver, in which case every giver must sign off almost in some implicit sense what you're doing? Or is it that you are, the giver owes a debt to the recipients of zakat, you've taken it, you're not responsible for that relationship. So there's just something there. So I'd say there's a few inherent challenges in anyone who's going to utilize a public pot for such purposes. And I'd say those challenges were met.
Yeah.
That's why I think the strategy was discontinued with all of these points. So there were some people who'd be supported, some in the community would say, hang on, I don't think they're representative, I think they're problematic. And then there's just this question of taking the community on the journey. So this was a phrase that was used a lot. You know, you have a community of givers, supporters, and a general Muslim public
who've never seen
were
this
they
approach.
sufficiently educated to come along on this journey or not?
Yeah.
So I think that's my very brief assessment of what happened. If I can say briefly as well, just from my point of view, I joined NZF in 2021, and I joined, my intention was to oversee a transformation. What's a transformation that's of interest to me for National Zakat Foundation? It's really in the first word. I really want this foundation to be truly national. And what I mean by that is, I want Muslims from across the United Kingdom, across ideological divides, across, if there were cultural or ethnic differences, across all of that, I'd like zakat to be a foundation for us to really feel connected, to really feel part of an ummah that's there for each other, because I think that's right at the heart of what zakat can and should achieve. And for that, part of what I'm very keen to oversee is for National Zakat Foundation to really empower what I would call almost a community or a public movement of sorts, where people really feel empowered to care for their own communities.
Yeah.
So we've almost got two narratives we can dive into in the broader zakat conversation.
Yeah.
But for me, it really is about national foundation, community powered through zakat.
So let's dive into that then. So what is zakat supposed to be achieving? Like, what's the point of zakat?
So what I normally say is I say, let's build this picture up. So it's theologically problematic for some people to say, I know the purpose of capital P of a particular injunction of the sacred law, because the point is the sacred law, like God's external creation, it's full of multifaceted wisdoms and insights that you draw from it. And so we could tackle the question of zakat, an extremely intricate institution, from a variety of angles. But what I'd like to do is build it up from the bottom up. If you want to understand what the institution achieves, let's look at its fundamental constraints. So there's a really important constraint that I think is really worth stressing, which is that the recipient of zakat, for the vast majority of Muslim scholarship, the recipient of zakat has to be a Muslim. So for me, that's your first fundamental constraint. What does that first fundamental constraint teach us? It's that it's an institution whose purpose is not just generically helping someone. because there are many people who would need help who are not Muslims, which the Quran and Sunnah emphasize a lot, helping all humans and all creatures, etc. But zakat is like a subset of Muslim giving, whose purpose is not just then therefore the impact you have on the person, but there's something about the nature of your relationship with that person, namely that you're both believers. So therefore, at the core of the institution is strengthening a tie of belief. A tie that if two people believe in Allah and His Messenger, they should feel they've joined a family. And that family notion creates duties. And the most fundamental duty is that of care. You could say economic care, financial care, a duty of care, a reality of belonging. So at its core, it's part of the many institutions of the Islamic sacred law to really solidify the notion of ummah. And therefore, ummah is a thing we also need to be exploring. What's the point of that?
Yeah. So it sounds to me like you're saying it's almost like a subscription into Club Islam.
Yes, that definitely is a phrase actually Iqbal Nasim, the previous CEO of NZF used to use, and yeah, I think it's a very fair and good description. This club is not one of my vocabulary items, so I use just generic terms like belonging and community and ummah.
Yeah.
But if you were to call ummah a club, then definitely it's about belonging. Subscription fee also is not a vocabulary item I use because I like to emphasize more about a duty of care.
Sure.
Belongs because you belong. So it's not that if you don't pay the subscription, we're going to kick you out. It's we're reminding you that belonging is real. Brotherhood is not about lip service. There's a reality in it. And it starts right from the pillar that some of your wealth has to help those in your community because belonging is real.
Yeah. So let's say we've got this conception of like this group, right? And you have this duty to contribute to the group. And you said it, you know, it primarily should be for Muslims. So we'll let's interrogate that in a second.
Yeah, sure.
But the other aspect to this is that you've got this duty to help, right? What does that mean? Like, how are we supposed to be helping?
What do you mean? Do you mean broader than zakat now?
No, just zakat. Because like at a conceptual level, that makes sense. But then, how does that word manifest specifically?
Well, we're building up the picture, right, of what zakat is doing. So if we start right at its fundamental core, though, the help is about giving something to somebody. That's why in all of the classical fiqh, there's some modern debates on this, zakat needed at its core to involve a transfer of ownership of a thing to a person. You can call it money or whatever comes off the side of that. So yeah, right at its core, it is about empowering a recipient by giving them a thing. Usually it would be gold or silver or animals or fruit or vegetables, but that's right at the core. It's important to remember that because if we build complex narratives, it's important to keep at the core what it is. That's why I'm empowering someone. I am honoring someone. Why are words like honor and dignity important? It's because the way zakat is framed, it's a duty on the giver and the right of the recipient. So it's not like regular charity. It actually falls outside of the secular description of philanthropy. Because philanthropy in the secular framing, they call it voluntary giving for the public good, I think it is. So zakat is not voluntary giving. You're not doing anyone a favor. It's a duty you have just to purify your own holding, that you give a right to a person who is, we can talk about the description of the person. So why am I talking about dignity and honor? Because when you give it to the recipient, you say it's yours. It's your right. I thank you for it. You're purifying me by taking this. And there is a thing the person is taking. Again, that's right at the core. And then we can start building up.
And Sheikh, what about fi sabilillah? Does that fit into this same transfer of wealth to someone, or is that like a special category?
Yeah, so like I said, we can build up a complex picture, but if you stay right at the core of it, all the categories of zakat, if we just stick to classical fiqh and we'll take some sophisticated questions, they all contain right at the core a transfer of an item of value to a person who has been selected to be eligible.
Yeah.
We can talk about selection criteria,
Sure.
and which might come into categories like you're saying. So
Yeah.
you are doing good work. We want to empower you with
Right. Yeah.
something.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
But at its core, I'm giving you something because it's your right and it's my
yeah.
duty. And at its core, we are strengthening whatever the selection criteria might be,
Yeah.
an understanding of ummah, that faith is experienced in community, that the ties within community are sanctified and sacred, and the pillar of the faith is reminding us of that by obliging this transfer of ownership.
Yeah. What are the what are the salient kind of differences between the different madhahib on zakat that I think are important for us to keep in mind?
Yeah, good. So this is really helpful. And before we start, like I said, the Hanafi school I have studied in some detail. The other schools have got general, wider readings, and so please, if you're watching at home, consult an expert if you want to take some of my comments about other schools further. When you're talking about salient differences, before we get into what I think you mean, is that we have to remember zakat is an entire system. And so there are questions on what kind of wealth, who is collecting it, what's the nature of the person collecting. There's questions on distribution, which really what people are most interested in, so I'm going to focus on that. But just to remind people, it's a really complete topic. It ties to other chapters in fiqh, which deal with political theory, which maybe we can and should touch on as well. It's not lying floating. It's not just about what do I have to give, let me give it. The classical fiqh talks really about the entire vision, and within their discussions, there's an economic theory, there's a theory of items of ownership. So it's a really fascinating, broad topic and fundamental. So,
and do you think, I think I heard from someone that zakat is probably the topic out of let's say the 5 pillars, where there's probably the most variety of views on it. On
yeah, it's
like
hard
material
to
things,
answer that.
on material things.
I don't know, it depends on what's material.
That's
you
true.
might say it's not material where I raise my hand or how
Yeah.
I wave my finger and things of that. But material's a complicated one unless you can define it. So I'd say there's healthy dispute on many things, but zakat does stand out because of its political nature.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's the political element which probably is expected to fill in for areas that jurists might not detail, and now we have differences over. Whereas other parts of the fundamental acts of worship, I am doing it as an independent actor. Therefore, I can pray differently from the leader of the prayer. The leader of the prayer raises hands in particular ways, and I'm doing it my way. I can have difference with the leader of my prayer, as long as we agree that there's 4 rak'ahs in dhuhr. But in zakat, I can't have differences with the person I've given my zakat to, in as much as he is handling it and I'm not.
Yeah.
And therefore, in early Islam and the way that all of the classical fiqh really envisage zakat administration, it is more akin to taxation. There is an idea of a state-sanctioned zakat collection bureau, if you like. And that bureau, i.e. state-sanctioned office, will fill in for most of the details jurists either have not defined or where they've disagreed. It's not an academic question, zakat, as they pictured it, meaning they're differing academically over it. But when you live it, lived experience is not academic. There'll be a tax collector who might come to your door and they'll tell you what the code is of the day, and you just hand it over. That's where zakat is different. We're dealing with a post-tax, so it's half tax, half worship. And we have to fit together a narrative because we have to do the worship and it hasn't got all of the tax apparatus.
Yeah.
That's where some of these debates become more palpable, but there's something we have to treat, which is, if you want to call it the elephant in the room, which is the whole system that we don't often talk about.
Because that's really fascinating, because I had there's a startup that I was speaking to in the Middle East, and they've got, in Saudi Arabia in particular, they've got a zakat collection agency, and apparently they're quite, they can be quite aggressive at times. and also perhaps not as well informed about how certain businesses are run. So he was complaining about how they're slightly mercurial. He'd come to an agreement in terms of how we should work out zakat, and then they changed it, and then they charged more, and then he's had to go through like a arbitration with them to sort it all out. But that's a really interesting point, because here in the UK, where there isn't a central sovereign, right, that just uses its coercive force to be able to achieve what it needs. This is a real debate where there are essentially several kind of little small polities, which is another way of thinking of charities, right? Because they're the ones who've been entrusted with making these decisions. Whereas in Saudi Arabia, it doesn't matter if you disagree with him or not. It's just what is, right? And that's that.
And we, as viewers, will see strengths and weaknesses of wanting to belong to either of these two forms of being. If you want an easy example of what this is like, it's like the moon sighting debates. If you live in a Muslim country, again, I don't know how it works in Pakistan, because there's some peculiarities of how Pakistan religion and state meet, but most of the Muslim world, there is no debate when Ramadan started or when Eid happens.
It's easy,
And so any debate outside of a state structure is purely academic. Like, I believe in local sighting, you believe in national, and I think calculation's all right. It's purely academic. And the fiqh supports this, that there should be a structure that facilitates communal decision, communally binding decision making. The fiqh wants that because it's all about creating a sense of strong, unified ummah. Whereas we over here don't have such structures, and so the academic becomes painful. Like, I feel as an individual, I have to choose for myself, do I believe in local sighting or national sighting? It's very painful, as an individual. And the fiqh doesn't want that. It wants us to form structures so that we can experience the sharia in community. And so zakat is just dealing with that. And just like much of our fiqh is. That's why the minority setting is a relevant part of our conversation today.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Because I suppose in some ways it's like the whole Islamic finance discussion, isn't it? Because where you're thinking about how you can establish like a prayer room in a casino. That's essentially the discussion. And the discussion in the prayer room is, all right, look, what should the carpet color be? And who are we going to let in? What are we going to do in this prayer room? And all this time, there's there's stuff happening outside. And actually the conversation, perhaps this entire conversation really should be about how do we change the casino as a whole into, I don't know, maybe a masjid.
Well, it depends on the vision. That's a very complicated metaphor. But certainly I'd say, can we expand into neighboring rooms? And can we be a force of good for those who are enjoying the casino? So it depends on, again, a wider notion of what is the nation, what's the, But definitely there has to be a wider narrative. Whatever.
Take up cricket instead.
Whatever we think about the casino, it has to be a wider narrative. Correct.
So Sheikh, I think you were going into. So why don't we go into the Quran, right? And so what are the key verses? I guess there's obviously the famous verse where you've got the different categories of zakat, and why don't we use that to figure out where the trigger points are, where people go left and right.
Yeah, sure. So, and I'll probably combine that with your early question, which we also got stuck in the beginning of. So, the main thing about the Quran, before we come to literally one verse that I think is the intended verse, which is the verse 60 of Surah At-Tawbah, 960. There's not many verses of the Quran I know by chapter number and verse number, but this one's 960. Yeah, exactly. Before I get into that, it's important for us just to state the very simple premises that the Quran speaks about the zakat a lot by name, and salat and zakat are combined 28 times in the Holy Quran, and so it's a really important thing in the Quran. And zakat as an institution, which is what we're discussing today, rules, purpose, and so on, was instated when the Prophet ﷺ migrated to Medina to lay the foundations really for the Muslim Ummah, this Muslim civilization. So zakat is a pillar there. Half of the Quran, more than half, was revealed before the migration to Medina. That more than a half speaks an extremely great deal about a duty of care to those who are in need, often downtrodden, often ignored. So before we can even talk, if you want to talk about a Quranic view, the Quran came and challenged society very early in the Quranic mission for what you can simply call a form of economic justice, very early. Whether it's an Ibn Sabil, a stranger, refugee, traveler, or a Miskin, someone impoverished, or a Yatim, someone who's an orphan, right at the beginning, no technicalities involved, you might find yourself in hell if you don't give some of your money to these people. That's just a message to everybody. The idolaters are told that you'll be asked about these poor people. And so just really keen to keep that in mind. Islam came very early on for economic justice, very early on in its messages, again and again and again. And a lot of hints that, for example, in the Meccan Quran, believers have in Surah Al-Ma'arij, in their wealth, في أموالهم حق معلوم للسائل والمحروم, that in their wealth is a known right for those who ask and those who are unable to ask. It's almost like right at the beginning, you have some of your wealth you must set aside. That's the mark of the believer. But without the institutionalization that we are discussing today. So Quran and Zakat has a lot to talk about. The ethic, the virtue, the centrality of. But then when it comes to the rules of, then the main surah is Surah Tawbah. Surah Tawbah, before we come to again 960, it does, interestingly, and I'd say confusingly also maybe for the general reader, is that Quran and Sunnah use Sadaqah and Zakat interchangeably. Whereas we have separated them cleanly. Zakat is the obligatory 2.5% that we're discussing today. Sadaqah is the extra. But really they're interchangeable terms in the Quran and Sunnah. So in fact, Surah Tawbah primarily uses Sadaqah. But it's clearly using it institutionally. And that's why scholars unanimously see these as Zakat verses.
Yeah.
But the Arabic isn't saying Zakat, by the way. Before we come to 960, one last thing. Is Surah Tawbah does give a real sense of centralized administration. The Prophet ﷺ is told, خُذْ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ صَدَقَةً تُطَهِّرُهُمْ وَتُزَكِّيهِمْ بِهَا وَصَلِّ عَلَيْهِمْ. So the Prophet ﷺ is told, take it. So that's the whole idea, that it's...
And this is Zakat again.
Tax-like, yeah, correct. It's a tax-like system. And the Prophet ﷺ, by virtue of being the head of this community, he is told, you must take it, and you take it. It's not about asking them if they want to give.
Yeah.
That's the idea. Take from their wealth a sadaqah which will purify them and through which you are cleansing them. So they are beneficiaries of this when they give it to you, and pray for them. And so this is the whole etiquette of the institutionalized zakat collector, to remind people it's your duty, you must give, and you are the beneficiary, and may God accept it from you. Like there's a whole relationship here that's being summarized in this phrase. Take it, you're cleansing them, and pray for them. Because your prayer is a source of tranquility for them. So there's something just about the institution.
Yeah.
But other than that, the only rule-based treatment that we can really deal with in detail is this one verse 960.
Sheikh, before we get into the verse, why do you think the Quran talks about zakat and sadaqah so interchangeably? And are we right in having moved away from that? Like, why do we not talk about it so interchangeably?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating question. I can't give you a categoric answer, but what I can say, just a couple of things. So first of all, why is this obligatory giving both called zakat and sadaqah? Zakat is from purification and growth. That's the Arabic word. It purifies your wealth, because if you don't give it, your wealth is polluted by somebody else's right. And it grows your wealth in as much as all giving is a means for growth in the narrative of the Holy Quran. Sadaqah comes from sidq and genuineness. And when you give of your wealth for the sake of Allah, you are essentially validating your claim to believe in the hand of God, the generosity of God, the protection of God, that He will take care of you, and that's why you're giving it away to somebody else. It's an act of trust. I'm giving away, and I'm believing that God will reward me in this life and in the next life. In this life by taking care of me, and the next life by the reward of that. So it's a mark of genuineness in faith, that's what sadaqah means, and it's an act of purification and growth, that's what zakat means. That's why charity is given both words. The institutionalized charity is given both words, and the non-institutionalized is also given both words. What we can say is there's a need to distinguish for the sake of clarity and communication, because one has very clear restricted rules and one is a general impetus for giving. So we need to distinguish whatever we call the two. And I'd say that historically, as the institution was lived, there's another important point also before we go into the verse, which is there's no one verse that we must hair split, and that's the only way to know what the Prophet ﷺ taught. Because zakat was institutionalized and politicized, the most important source of knowing what zakat is lived transmission. Because it was the most key part of the policy of the Caliph Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him. His most key signal achievement was zakat administration, what he's remembered most for in his 2 years of caliphate. Sayyidina Umar had very important statements. So I would also remind everyone at home as well, it's not that there's one verse, we hair split over it, we have no other thing to hang on to. There is an entire tradition, lived experience, companion practice that the jurists of Islam tap into as they analyze this verse and the wider institution. So all I'll say is, as part of lived experience, early community, yes, zakat became more prominent for the institution, the tax of giving, and sadaqah for the non. But just the Quran and Sunnah are interchangeable.
No, I think that's a really fair point, a really valid point. What about, because I think Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, when there was that stand on zakat, that's very clear. And I'm trying to think back to the prophetic period, and how, were there any really kind of clear differences where, like, okay, this money is not suitable for this, and this money is suitable for this? Were there any?
Without a doubt. Absolutely categorically clear from the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Because this zakat, I believe, is around the second year after Hijrah, when it was instated. It was, think of taxation today. It's really important to use both words actually, tax and worship, because you won't understand the rules of zakat without that. What is taxation in any political theory? It's an obligatory payment by virtue of being a citizen or protected by government. Even in any country today, if I evade tax, if I avoid tax, if I step outside of a taxation regime, I'm considered a criminal actor. So it's important to realize that. So zakat has this tax nature. Correct. Well, even then, I'm super rich, I'm smart, but I'm publicly respecting the tax regime. As soon as I publicly disrespect it, I'm a criminal.
St. Kitts, apparently.
Sorry?
Mohsin's been looking into this. Apparently, St. Kitts is the place where you get a citizenship.
Achha.
And apparently it's great after that. So we're researching into it at the moment.
Okay.
But anyway, sorry.
No. It sounds fascinating. When zakat comes, again, it's part of this new polity that's being established in Medina. It's an absolute duty to pay it. That's your mark that you're from the believing community. It's a part of a broader, you could say, faith-based tax regime. This is the tax that Muslims must pay. That's the mark and the duty of belonging. Therefore, its rules are clearly laid out and its wealth is carefully protected. That's why the books of fiqh actually speak about what they call kutub Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam dictated like a written code, because the zakat most of the zakat we think is on money, but the majority of zakat was on animals. That's why when we start a fiqh book of zakat, it starts with camels. Then you think, okay, now I'm going to get to money soon. But no, then it goes to cows. Then you think, don't worry, money is coming in a little bit. Then it goes to sheep. And then for the Hanafis, they talk about horses. It's a point of debate amongst the scholars. Then you go to money? No, then you go to agriculture. And then you come to your gold, silver, and your trade goods. Resources. And so people don't even picture it, how it would have felt like. Zakat collection is about counting someone's cows. This is where it actually starts. And the tax rules on camels is seriously complicated. Like if you're new to it, if it's 5 camels, then you're paying a sheep. If it's 10 camels, paying 2 sheep. But when you go to 25, you go to a particular age of camel. When you go to 30, there's another age. And it's a really complicated regime up until about 100 and then 120, then it gets a bit easier. But what happens is up until about 100, these are almost dictated codes from the Prophet ﷺ, because people have to know what they owe. It's not about, I feel generous, I want to give. So sadaqah is separate. The Quran from the beginning to the end of the revelation, chronologically, is always speaking about giving. Give, spend, spend. That's on you. Zakat, no, it's institutionalized. So all I'll say is the rules were clear. Then we had a whole institution around it. So the hadiths will talk about, for example, the ibil of sadaqah, which means the camels that were collected for zakat are then going to pasture grounds, which are the pasture grounds for the camels of sadaqah, because they have to be looked after.
And by sadaqah
we mean zakat. Yeah, good. You're catching on. Good. And then we'd have the shepherds whose job it was to care and protect, so no one runs off with them. The ibil of sadaqah, which are the camels collected in zakat. And then they'd be transported to or given to the recipients. And so it's a full system. And so there's no ambiguity that this would mix with what we now would call sadaqah. And when the Prophet ﷺ would send somebody up as a governor to, in the latter part of his mission, ﷺ, to Yemen, to other places, he'd send them as judges and he'd send them as zakat collectors. It was the most important thing. If you're going to any land, you tell them about La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah ﷺ, and those, if they answer you, then you tell them about the prayer, you tell them about the zakat, and you administer and you judge in their disputes. So it was really centralized, really important. One last statement that comes to mind is that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud has a really strong statement about this. May Allah be pleased with him. He said, we were told to pray and we were told to give zakat, and he who doesn't give zakat has no prayer. That last part, maybe it was his statement, but the point was they really saw it as, are you from us or not? That was the whole point of, that's what the zakat signified. You're part of the community.
And where does sadaqah fit into this? So is it that, when you have examples of someone comes to the Prophet ﷺ and he gives something to them and he's very generous, let's say during Ramadan, more so than any other month, etc., etc. Is it because in this situation where you've got sovereign authority in Medina, and that is one of the key characteristics of zakat, where's the space for sadaqah in this?
Yeah, so sadaqah is your personal giving. If you give it to the Prophet ﷺ, you're giving it to him to pass it on to anyone who he feels is in need. And really, it's not administered. So we'll have to see. But I don't think it would typically be given to someone who is in a political position. It'll be given directly. It'll be given frequently. And the Quran, till the beginning of the end, really is an urging to giving. So all I'll say is think of it as non-administered, non-based on rules. It's just based on this core impetus of give as much as you can give. You want to protect yourself, give. You want to succeed in life, give. You want to be protected by God, give. You want so on. That's where sadaqah fits in.
And what about when Prophet ﷺ, he is saying that when he's fundraising for, let's say, certain ghazawat and certain battles and what have you, and people like Uthman, he's coming and he's giving. Where does that fit in? Because there he is also encouraging them to give. So that means that there is some kind of choice there, right?
Exactly, it's a really good question. That's why Sayyidina Uthman, may Allah be pleased with him, was praised very, very highly by the Prophet ﷺ when he gave so much wealth, because it wasn't his duty. This is the point. It's voluntary giving to serve the community, and it wasn't his duty to give as much as he gave. And so that is voluntary giving, therefore. It's not taxation. And it's quite funny, we're going to come to fi sabilillah and early notions of military effort, but the fiqh scholars, it's another topic. Fiqh is very anti-tax, meaning outside of what the sacred law points out, fiqh is really there to contain government. It creates a space for government to act, and it produces a language for the Muslim public to hold government in check. So fiqh has a very interesting balance between government and the Muslim public. It's very anti-tax. So in the chapter of jihad, in the classical fiqh, they have to discuss Does the ruler have a right to raise taxes to pay for a war? And it's a tricky question. If you want to know more, you can maybe look it up. But what I remember of the answer was no, they can't. They got to, unless they've exhausted all the public treasury, and then maybe if it's required, they can stipulate some payment. So anyway, that's a whole other topic. But just to say, it's not taxation. And so therefore, if there were instances we have of collecting funds to pay for a campaign, it's urging people to give outside of a tax regime. That's how we would understand it. That's why it's praiseworthy. The more you give, the better. Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu gives all, Umar gives half, Uthman funds an army, and they are all, it's not coincident that, what role they took in Islam later on. It's that they were really committed heart and soul to the success of the community. And that's their status, but it wasn't expected of every person to give at that level.
Which sets us up quite nicely for the verse, right? Because at some point we're going to get into Fi Sabilillah. But let's get into the verse.
So, we're getting into the verse. And you asked me a question before we came to the verse. I'm going to keep that question with the verse as we walk through the verse now. Which was a Hanafi verses. Verse has, it's not verses as in plural of verses, but Hanafi is against it. So, the verse in question, let's just read it. Sometimes I get the order wrong, so I apologize now, but you're here to correct me. But the verse in Surah At-Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem, Innama sadaqatu, so now we know sadaqat is zakat. إنما الصدقات للفقراء والمساكين والعاملين عليها والمؤلفة قلوبهم وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله وابن السبيل فريضة من الله والله عليم حكيم. So the verse starts with innama, and that's where the verse takes some authority from this phrase. It means only sadaqat, plural of sadaqah. The sadaqat that are collected, which in the context of Surah Tawbah is the institutionalized charity, which is the zakat, can only be for, that's how innama, this 3-letter word, it's a lot of weight for someone who doesn't know Arabic, but it means only. And then we come into these 8 words. Some scholars, and before we go, let's translate them actually, then I'll translate them, I'll go into the overview of how the schools differ, and then we can look at them one by one. And then please feel free to jump in and at any point. So if we translate them, fuqara and masakin both mean impoverished, and we'll come to the debate on this. That's 1 and 2. Amilina alayha, number 3, are literally those who work upon the sadaqat, meaning those whose job it is to support the administration. And we can talk about that. Then we have literal translation, in the neck, which literally means freeing slaves, and we can talk about that. In the neck sounds weird, but it is spent in necks, and that means freeing necks, and that's why it's a reference to slavery.
al-Qulub is before, right?
Oh, there you go. Like I said, I get the order mixed up when I'm talking. Sorry, so the 4th one is the hearts that are brought near. So this is one of the more debate-inducing ones. What does it mean to bring hearts near through zakat? So we can talk about that. But in short, it's either about political representation or facilitating conversion. So we can talk about that. Then we come to in the necks, So that's about freeing slaves. We can talk about that. Then we come to the Gharimin. That's the people in debt. Not so controversial. Then we come to Fi Sabilillah, which is the other one that the question around becomes a question of debate. Fi Sabilillah means in the way of God. So who are the people in the way of God, and what are you helping them to do? That's the question there. And then the last one is Ibn Sabil, not a topic of huge debate, but Ibn Sabil literally means the son of the path, and means the person who is cut off from their home in a strange place and should be supported. So you've got 8 here. We can go into them. Before we go into them, your earlier question. So there's a question before we look into them. Are these 8 independent, separate pathways to think about zakat? Meaning they represent their own form of selection criteria. To use a phrase we did right at the beginning, we select someone for zakat. Are they their own independent selection criteria? Or are they just instances of a basic selection criteria that must be satisfied by all? So for the Hanafi scholars then, these 6 categories are all branches, if you like, of a key criterion that must be met, which is simply what they call Fakir. Fakir meaning to be impoverished, to be in economic need. Why do they state this? You could say for a few reasons. Partly is because, like I said, as before we went into this conversation, that it's not that all we have is one verse and we have to split our hairs over it and that's the only way we'll understand what zakat is about. It's an entire history of the early community. It's the pillar of the prophetic political economy which the Prophet ﷺ established. There is a whole host of sources which represent, you could say, lived experience of the early community. And so it's important to filter everything through the wider tradition, which is what all classical jurisprudence aims to do. And then we have very well-known general statements of the wider experience. That zakat is from the aghniya to the fuqara. It's from those who have to those who don't. Then there's the basic insight. I'm taking items of value from someone to give it to someone who obviously doesn't have items of value. It's just the notion of the movement, that it necessarily is, you must give to those who don't have, those who need. And then there's the build-up of the Quran to this, right? And the build-up is all about the impetus of giving, the duty of giving. So anyway, so the Hanafis interpret it through the wider, therefore, impetus of the revelation of sadaqah and zakat, and the wider prophetic statements on this, which all have this, and then the notion of movement of wealth. That faqr there must be obviously need in the person you're helping. Then why have categories at all? So we can come to look at that. So therefore, as we go through each of these, the Hanafis will say, yes, fi sabilillah, but the person is needy. Yes, whatever, we go through each of these, but obviously the person's in need. And then what's the nature of need per category? So that's the basic entry point.
Yeah. So how do they make the distinction between mu'allafat al-Qulub and Amilin? I guess even the Amilin, you can kind of understand the point of it. Okay, fine, you need like an administrative side of it. But where does mu'allaf, like how can they make that?
Yeah, so we'll have to come to mu'allaf, that's why I took them out.
Right, okay.
So Amilin for them was explicitly the only rich person who takes zakat, because he or she is taking it for labor. It's a return for labor. And if they didn't take it as a return for labor, the system just wouldn't work.
That's fine, yeah.
And that's why they've been singled out. And mu'allafa, we'll come into the conversation on that. So the other schools saw these, if you look at these, again, the 6 that we're engaging with right now, primarily as independent categories. And so therefore, fi sabilillah, for example, would need its own selection criteria or eligibility criteria. And poverty is not intrinsic to the eligibility criteria. That's the only difference. So it sounds big, but it's not necessarily, we're just saying there's eligibility criteria per, and poverty is one of them or not. That's what the whole debate is, if you like, between how the Hanafis viewed the criteria and these particular 6 and how the others did. Yep, so we've taken care of that now. And what does it mean to be poor? We should go into that as well, but let's do it just from the beginning. So if you read the beginning like a Hanafi, you'd read it as follows, and the verse has a very beautiful logic, and I'll come to mu'allafa in just a little bit. So you have Fakir and Miskin, the first 2. What's the difference? Again, a big debate, but it's not consequential because all agree that one of the 2 words means somebody who has basically nothing, really dirt poor, and basically has nothing. And the other of the 2 means somebody who has things but is really struggling. And so therefore, again, read it like a Hanafi going into the verse, the first 2 really lays out the selection criteria, which is zakat is for people who are poor, who might have nothing and might have things but they're really quite struggling. And it's within this that the zakat has to work. Why lay out these 2? It's reminding the reader right at the beginning, don't think zakat's just for the dirt poor. And that's a major issue in our community, by the way. When you talk about poverty in the UK, people's first question is anyone in need over here? They themselves know the pain they would not want to have if they weren't sure of how they'd pay next month's heating bill. They know the stress it would cause them. They know the pain it would cause them. They know the trauma it would cause them. They know the marital debates it will cause them. They know the stress on the... They know that, the incredible mind-numbing pain it would cause. But when it comes to other people, we think, no, zakat's for the person who's got nothing. And that's where there's this disconnect. The verse tackles it right at the beginning. It's not about dirt poor. There's people in your community who have pain because of financial wealth, and you know what it's like, because most people have been through it at some point. Whether it's zakat eligibility or not, we can come to, but this pain of financial dire issue, we know what it's like. You shouldn't want it for anybody. And that's what the verse tackles right at the beginning. It's not about dirt poor. And in fact, the Quran elsewhere, which scholars also use to imply a zakat guideline in Surah Baqarah, that the best people to give zakat to, or the sadaqat to, are the people that you don't know their need, and their need is hidden, but they're really struggling in private, and you should seek them out. So it's really important, though, how it, right from the get-go, it's not dirt poor. Nothing to, they have things, and there might be hidden poverty, and they might appear respectable, but behind closed doors, they're crying and struggling. And you've got to find them.
And what about the order? Is the order important? Because I know you've not said anything about the order, but you are saying this is the first thing.
Yeah, well, we haven't got in.
Yeah.
But I will say, in what I'm calling the Hanafi reading, I think 1, 2, 3, fabulous order.
Yeah.
And then we'll come to the rest.
Okay.
Other than that, no, I've not got details about other orders. If I want to say 7 before 8 and 6 before, I've not got reflections on that.
I guess my question is more just like, the Quran obviously doesn't say anything without there being a purpose to it. And the fact that it has come out in this order, is that relevant, or is it more, this is a set of all things that you can give zakat to, and it doesn't really matter? Because it's the thing that I'm thinking about here is, well, what about if we just say that the really needy, the people who are dirt poor, we need to exhaust them first before we move on. That's kind of where I'm going to.
And that's where, again, I remind also listeners that Islamic jurisprudence takes into consideration the wider set of indicators, and not just one verse. The other thing to point in the Quranic verse, obviously the verse uses the letter waw. Letter waw means non-order, as far as we look into Arabic. There's a debate on wudu. If Islamic Finance Group wants to do a wudu podcast, there's a whole debate on orders and wows, and it's quite fascinating.
That's true.
That verse on purification is fascinating, and
the
we
feet.
should.
Wal-Ka'bayn.
That's
the one
exactly.
That's the ankle in the middle.
Yeah. That, what do you do with the feet? We should do a IFG wudu special, is my suggestion. So coming back to this one,
with a focus on Zamakhshari's tafsir, getting into the.
You know why Zamakhshari's tafsir is relevant, by the way?
Grammar, right?
Because he says the reason why some qira'at have arjulikum is because people often waste water on the feet. So it says it can be like wiping. So there's an economy of wastage which can fit into an IFG angle if you use the Zamakhshari as the entry point to the verse on wudu, that you can justify the podcast. But if we stick to...
Let's do this,
If we stick to this one right now. So it's not necessary the order has been looked like that. To the best of my recollection, I'm not aware of any jurisprudential argument like that. They have argued priorities or not. I've read a few things around that, but not to do with order of verse. That has been taken in that way. Plus they debate which is the dirt poor of the two. So already that affects your question of order. Because I said there's a debate among scholars about which is the dirt poor out of the two labels. So if you come in, so you've got two, dirt poor and the lowest and highest level of poverty, and it's really important to reflect why it starts like that. Because it's a major problem in our current community to not realize that, and just to think of dirt poor as what zakat's about. Then you come to the Amilin, which is and again, it's a huge topic for us to discuss either within this question or in a later part of our conversation, which is just that the Quran is emphatically clear that this system has to be self-sustaining, because it will be a catastrophe if we have a Baytul Mal full of zakat and we can't afford to administer it. That would be a catastrophe of epic proportions. And that's why the Quran right at the beginning says the Amil has to take. Amil includes again, it was a whole system because it was part of a political sort of wing of tax collection. You've got your collectors, you've got distributors, you've got protectors, like I've talked about the shepherds who take care of the camels of sadaqah. So people who are involved in the system, from the collection to the distribution, and what's in the middle, these are people who are working over the zakat, and they should be paid a fair day's wage. What is a fair day's wage? The Hanafi scholars literally said it should be what is the salary and market rate, because they're just putting work in. If you don't pay them a fair day's wage, they're going to do some other work.
Yeah.
And the system will suffer as a result. There's this common fatwa of 1/8. Hanafis don't have 1/8. They say it could be up to 50%. Because the point is, most of it should go to the poor, but it has to be self-sustaining. What is an amil? Again, that's if you want to come to it later. But just to say, it's a wage for an honest day's work, which should be a fair wage for the labor someone's putting in. And it's required because the system will not work. None of the objectives will be realized if it's not self-sustaining.
Yeah.
That's the Quran and jurisprudential understanding of this third one.
And do you think that a sovereign can take that too far, in the sense that if we think of a government using zakat money and saying that actually this is essentially the entire social security system, this is the entire housing benefit and NHS system can be supported by this, and therefore anyone that we're going to employ for that is going to be within the amilin.
Yeah, that's where the restricted nature of zakat becomes important and falls into my conversation about fiqh. Fiqh is really fabulous in that the sharia is urging a political reality to come about. You must come together, be organized, be structured, have leaders, obey them, etc. But the other part of fiqh is putting a lot of check on the political structure and giving a language of calling to task because they've got such defined boundaries. So zakat is so clearly defined that it's not about, the amil, again, if you want to be really explicit, it's a human being doing a day's work to do with collecting, protecting, distributing. And so it's not open to wide extension, just by the very nature of what it's talking about. The recipients are very clearly defined. And so there's a check in the details that's important. But the reality of government power is just a part of the system because it's seen in its original instantiation as being centralized in this way.
Bismillah. So we've done sadaqat al-fuqara wal-masakin.
Yeah, good. And like I said, there's contemporary amil debates, but if you're interested, we can do later. Exactly.
Because in a way, it's like not relevant.
Yeah,
now.
exactly. Yeah, fabulous. Then you come to the mu'allafa. Good.
Here we go.
So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to give like a spectrum treatment of mu'allafa because our classical fiqh schools, the Sunni schools, which are four schools of law, they kind of plot on a spectrum when they deal with this category. And the spectrum in brief is either political or it's individual. So some look at this as a form of, it's a political advantage that this category of zakat is trying to achieve. And some discuss it as there's an individual advantage that this category is trying to receive. In my basic reading, I'd say in the early jurists, the political was the predominant. So the Hanafis are only political in how they discuss this category. The Hanbalis are only political, how they discuss this category. The early Malikis, I found them very political. The later Malikis, I felt in my basic survey, gave a lot of weight to the individual. And the Shafi'i scholars did a bit of both. They allowed for both, political and the individual. What do I mean by political? The political was about, and again, the way they describe the political, again, we'll talk later if you like how to possibly translate it today, but the way they describe it in the classical fiqh, again, early Islam, you picture it as tribal societies. So there's various tribal societies, and picture a Muslim community in the middle of that. And the Muslim community senses, like in all ever in political situations, possibility of threat. And think of zakat as centralized. So it's collected with state apparatus, it's centralized and distributed. Some of that collected tax, again the zakat tax, some of it can be used. This one, everyone ties to a sort of head of state decision, because it's a decision for the whole community.
Yeah.
It's not about individuals. This head of state apparatus can decide to spend some of that publicly collected zakat money to be spent to secure the security and thriving of that community. How so? By gifting it strategically to leaders of these other tribes in a way to build relations, i.e. soft power. Soft power is very much in vogue today. It's how all big nations engage in securing advantages, securing alliances, etc.
Yeah.
So soft power is what the mu'allafa is, this political angle to soft power. When you do the soft power and you are spending some of the community's zakat, that's why it must only be done by a representative figure of the community. An individual can't do this because I don't know, is this person going to be good for the Muslims? And I don't have the representative agency. So this is tied really to the political part of zakat. This tribal leader of the other tribe, is he Muslim or non-Muslim? There's a debate. So for the Shafis, he must be a Muslim. And they use the instance of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, who gave a number of the camels of sadaqah to a person called Adi ibn Hatim, may Allah be pleased with him, who was a chieftain of a Muslim tribe. And in this, Abu Bakr was, what happened was he collected all the zakat of his tribe and brought it to Abu Bakr, may Allah be pleased with him. And so Abu Bakr gave him, as a token of recognition, appreciation and so on, a gift of some of the camels that were collected from zakat. And this was, why is this good for the community? It will encourage all the tribal leaders to collect their zakat. So it's part of just using the funds to achieve particular aims. In this one, it was to encourage zakat collection. And it was given to a Muslim leader, not a non-Muslim leader. The Hanbalis and Hanafis, when they describe it, it seems predominantly non-Muslim leaders is what they're thinking about in the way that I've described. So there's various nations of tribes, and if we were to spend on making relations, we might ward off harm, achieve alliances. It will be good to protect the community, protecting the community of faith. That's the political one. I'll come back to the Hanafis in a moment. Got about 1,000,001 questions, I'm sure. But shall I go to the individual one first, or do you want to ask about this?
You carry on.
Yeah. Then I go to the individual one, which I've primarily only seen in Maliki and Shafi'i texts, which is about there's an individual whose faith we are preserving. How are we doing it? One of two ways. Either the individual is a new convert, and that's exclusively what the Shafi'is consider. It's a new convert to the faith. They are a Muslim.
Yeah.
But belonging to a faith is not just an abstraction. You have to belong to the community. And as they've come to the community, they feel alienated. And there's so much struggle to join the Muslim community because you've left behind the previous community. And again, modern converts struggle from this. I'm following on TikTok, actually, revert is getting more press now with the new generation. It's a term I've never used, but that's the TikTok term that I'm seeing actually. It's more popular nowadays. But anyway, if I can stick to convert, which is the one that I normally use. So a convert who's converted, even in modern Britain, for example, it can be very alienating from their own community. Parents might cut them off. They might get all forms of it. It's a huge struggle.
Yeah.
You've joined a new community. What if no one's there for you? You might think, what was this all about? I mean, I know I believed, but it's too difficult. I might as well just go back to my parents. I'll go back to what's familiar. So that's why some of the zakat is to say, no, we're here for you. Look, we have some money already just for someone like you. Here's a month's rent. Oh, here, come. We want to, it's just to remind them the community is there for them. You are from us. And we have some money set aside just for you. We want you. You're welcome. Ahlan wa sahlan. So it's just to facilitate that moment, which can be one of wavering. And another way this might be used, I've seen this more in the Maliki texts, but they have a debate on this, is that somebody's close to converting And again, it's a similar idea, but they're afraid. What about the alienation? And what about my economy? And what about my family? And what about this? What about that? But they're just on the verge. And this is where, again, we can have some money set aside just for them. Whether it's giving them gifts or giving them a Quran or giving them money and saying, no, we're here for you. We'll catch you.
Yeah.
Take the leap. It's okay. We are here. So that, in short then, is the spectrum of the Mu'allafa debate. It could be political, individual, and in both it could be Muslim, non-Muslim. So it's like a quadrant of 4. The Hanafis of all of the 4 classical schools, they speak about it as if it no longer exists. And the reason for that is because the Hanafis have in their fiqh epistemology, they give a lot of weight to the judgments of the Sahaba, like a lot. And Sayyidina Umar took an administrative stance to the Mu'allafa. In fact, it was during the end of the caliphate of Abu Bakr. Actually, Abu Bakr confirmed him and it continued thereafter. We don't have any records of the righteous caliphs doing Mu'allafa anymore. After this moment where Sayyidina Umar said, in those days Islam was weak because people came demanding this money. He goes, no, I don't want to give it to you. In those days Islam was weak, now Islam is strong. Whoever wants, let him join. So the idea was when Islam, all of Islam was in threat, this was a license, a method, a permission to achieve strength and security. But when Islam is strong and you're paying people to convert, that's a sort of act of weakness. Like, no, we're strong. We are dignified. We are triumphant. We are honorable. If you don't want us, well, we don't need you. There's no neediness in the relationship. So that, Sayyidina Umar said, is no longer needed. The reason it was for is no longer required. And we don't have any record of the caliphs doing this thereafter. And so when the Hanafis record the doctrine, say, well, it's cancelled by Umar. They don't actually even detail it too much, what the category is. And this discussion is in the other schools. So you will find a very valid, I think, early Maliki debate. Does it exist or not anymore? Some Hanbalis have this debate. Does it exist or not? So it's a valid debate in early Islam. But when the other schools start recording the details, they record it as if it's present. But there's an understanding that there will be a representative Muslim leader of sorts who will have to take the call, because private people don't have this agency. Because who am I to represent the Muslim public in an alliance? When you look at this political, am I to say that I've gathered all the Muslim funds and I'm going to put it all into this conservative? What does representation mean?
Yeah,
that's a question maybe we'll have to talk about.
Maybe this is the moment to do it. So Sheikh, it sounds like we can do some quite punchy stuff, right? So this Khidr's idea was, why don't we pay off all the mortgages for all the non-Muslims and possibly even the Muslims, maybe, I don't know about that, as Mu'allafat al-Qulub and al-Riqab. And if we did that, there would be literally millions of non-Muslims who would become Muslims just for that reason. First, what's your reaction to that? And then second, we'll get into who's in charge.
I think you're right. People would choose to become Muslim if they get their mortgages paid off. I think that's a quite valid proposition. But going back to, before we can go into any of this, it goes to where we said, what is the nature of representation? I think that's the key fundamental question here. Yeah. Because the assumption in the question of Mu'allafa, because we're focusing on what I've called the political angle, right? We'll come to the individual angle in a moment. Actually, no, your question is a bit weird. Is this political or individual? It's more, you want to facilitate the conversion of individuals.
It's a bit of both, actually, I think, really.
Yeah. See, when we talk about political, then why don't we go more political, actually, before we go into the mortgages? Sure. Like, we think the Muslims should gather money and then pay for the campaigns of, again, let's pretend there's no Muslims running in parliament. Let's just pretend for now. So-and-so, again, I won't take any names, so it doesn't look like I'm taking sides. Let's just say there's so-and-so political party, and we think we're going to back this person. Because this person who's a non-Muslim, we think their agenda will be favorable
to the Muslim.
And again, in the political map I showed, it wasn't to create conversion. It was to create a situation of safety, thriving, alliances, that the ummah can thrive. So we think this candidate, under this candidate, the ummah will thrive. Under the other candidate, we're going to struggle. So this is the proposition, right? So if I can invent this question first, not that I know the answer to it, but if I can invent this question, yarhamakallah, and then we'll come to the mortgage one. Then in this question, the main question is, who is deciding? So you will say, first of all, me and my mates, and they're not just mates, we've got clever Muslims who have been around in political spaces for a while, and they think this is a turning point election and non-Muslim A is going to be better for us than non-Muslim B. Okay, but then the next question is, that's your position in terms of people with an opinion, educated people, fine. But do you have the right to use zakat funds in this way? For that, the question then comes in a few angles. You and your group of people, what's the nature of your representation of the Muslim community? And there's one of two possible answers. In one possible answer, the community doesn't know about you. You've just built a new group called IFG Plus. It's a new group. No one knows about you guys. You guys think you're clever. You guys think you know what's going on here, for example. And that's one possibility. And one possibility is, no, you've been around for a while, you've been collecting zakat for a while. Muslims, let's just say all over the UK, are giving you zakat. So I guess these two extremes. So on this extreme, you are collecting zakat all across the country, you've been doing it for a while, and you represent the Muslims in various bodies and forums. You are a Muslim representative entity, you really, really are. These are two extremes on a spectrum, and they're both in a Muslim minority setting, which the classical rules aren't envisioning when they talk about this topic in this political way. All I've done is laid a map. I might not know what to do exactly after, but if I were to develop this further, I'm going to say as follows. Because there's another premise, unfortunately, I have to come to before we even come here now. Why did I come to this extreme case? Because there's another premise which I think there is precedent for in the classical fiqh, which ties to where I started from. Remember I said I was going to build a picture of zakat, but we stuck on the first brick actually, which was about its building ummah. So there's something in the classical fiqh that there is precedent for, which a number of jurists have mentioned. When Muslims live in a minority setting, their duty is obviously to establish their faith and live it, and then to create a representative hierarchy as much as possible. So Jum'ah needs us to be organized to appoint maybe a committee who can appoint an imam who can authorize Jum'ah, because Jum'ah was also a political thing. Our scholars say, okay, you've organized Jum'ah, now you organize Qada. Quite a tricky thing, maybe at some point we can discuss. So Qada is, have a judge, have a Muslim judge. It's a very, very tricky thing to do, because now we need a figurehead to actually judge our disputes, even things like, is somebody married or not? Is somebody divorced or not? Is somebody somebody's kid or not? Like it's serious sharia questions. You have to almost organize to appoint. Whereas the way the fiqh books envision it, there's a ruler who appoints. And so the summary is, the fiqh books have a narrative that Muslims should organize as much as possible, because that is the vision of the sacred law. That it should be an organized, strong, dignified ummah, and to do that, we should build representative structures.
So, Sheikh, this is down political theory, really, isn't it? Because
Yes.
I've just been noting down the various ways in which you can get that, what you've called representation, and so there's this idea that you've got a group that are similar, homogenous in the sense that they're Muslim, and you speak for that group in some way, shape, or form. And the ways I was thinking was that, in order for you to have that link, there needs to be some level of credibility, and that could be through action. So that was an interesting one where you said, look, they've been giving it for a while, and this kind of built up this credibility over time, which is interesting, because what were they doing the first time they started doing it? So
that's the most important question.
So
I want to talk about that. Yeah, correct.
So we'll do that.
Correct.
Then the other aspect, could be that it's just through. So that's credibility through action. The other one could be credibility through power. So they just happen to be I don't know, the biggest, there's apparently a removal van company in, I can't remember the area now, I think it was in Ilford, and they're known to be the biggest thugs, like the biggest Irish thugs in that area, so no one messes, no, sorry, not here, in Manchester. So I'm not going to name the name of the company, otherwise I might get beaten up.
Well, you named the nation.
The city.
Yeah.
So through power, right? Through either because they're just strong, they have credibility through that. And then the third way could be voting. So there's some level of, some idea of, voting and people saying, all right, we explicitly give you consent. Even that has its own issues because, it's like the issues that would happen normally with voting, right? Where what about if you aren't on the roll for this list of people that are voting or not? Do you count? And then the final idea I had was tacit consent, where everyone else is really passive, nothing's really happening, but they're not opposing you, and you've kind of de facto become the spokesperson that the BBC comes to each time, and no one's really opposing that. So that there's all these different ways that, and I guess the power aspect is also military, and like let's say the UAE or Saudi Arabia or Jordan or any Muslim country has obviously got that going for it. Yeah, how do we decide? Which of these paths do we go down?
Yeah. It's really important. I can't say which you should or shouldn't go down. It's really good you've put this frame in front of us, because it just reminds us, again, if you go back to just the point that I made, which was just that the sacred law bids us, orders us to organize ourselves as an ummah. That's the most important sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that inaugurates our calendar, which is the construction or the building of this community in Medina. And so we have to always think of that Medinan blueprint. That's the beginning of the sacred law. That's the beginning of our calendar. That we have a duty that if we are safe here, that we organize. And this is good for us and it's good for the public, because the public, we believe, the sacred law has wisdom the public will benefit from. For us to represent it, we need to be organized. And that's why it's really our weakness is that we allow ideological discussions to kind of define boundaries of participation in our community, whereas those should be seen more as academic debates, like academics do. Write papers, refute, it's healthy, it's good for an intellectual tradition, but they shouldn't be defining our community. Our community has to be defined by a wide commitment to each other as ummah, as people who believe in Allah and His Messenger. And as we organize in structure, we allow for the sacred law to have more expression in our lives and more wisdom and advantage for the society outside of us. I really liked your breakdown, but there's one thing you said about the first movers struggle. I want to talk about that a little bit.
Because that's where we are, I think.
Yes, correct. We've kind of pressed pause on our verse, but we'll
go back to that.
Yeah, we'll come back to that now. So we're not in the headspace of going through categories. We're just thinking about
we're going to solve this, and then the rest is easy after that.
To be honest, this is the fundamental question.
Yeah.
I want to talk about qadis as a case study of first movers struggle. So the sacred law and our fiqh books talk about that. Certainly our Hanafi books, they talk about a minority setting. If you can, because although the ruler should appoint qadis, ruler should appoint Jum'ah, we're saying if you don't have, organize and appoint. Because in Muslim political theory, the power of the Muslim ruler came from the public. The public's allowing or following or consenting, again, all of your types.
Yeah.
That they are going along with, so they've empowered. So there's a theory of power that's in the people. So in the absence of the Muslim ruler, the people have to organize as much as possible to make Jum'ah, to make qadis and so on. The qadi is really interesting as a case study of what I think is really useful as we talk about what I think the political representation. So Muslim family law, leave it the rest of Sharia for a moment, needs a qadi. Because the qadi represents the avenue to address the rights of a marriage, especially Muslim women. So Muslim women who have nikah arrangements without a qadi structure, they are exposed because they have rights they won't have the structure to enforce. So for example, a man has a duty to financially maintain a woman. If he's not doing it in an Islamic society, she goes to the Qadi. And the Qadi, I think, can send boys around to rough up the husband just a little bit to make the guy, because it's like ta'zir. It's like, I believe he has this leeway, pretty sure. He definitely has the power to imprison the husband, because that's what roughing up is a bit easier.
I think I've
come
up with a brilliant business idea, but carry on. Yeah.
IFG++.
It's a subscription for women who are getting married.
It's like a storage facility for husbands. We'll just put them in.
Well, we won't do the physical. We won't do the physical stuff because I think that's illegal. But we will ask them both at the time of marriage to agree to setting us up, let's say us or whoever, this business, as the independent arbitrator, and they've agreed that it's whatever we say will be binding, and they pay us a subscription for that. There we go. Qadi as a service.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
That's not a bad.
It's not a bad idea
to think about, because Muslim marriage relies on the social institution. That's why it needs witnesses. There's no other contract, the whole Sharia, there needs witnesses, because it's a communal engagement. The community is there to support this institution of marriage. The last thing a Qadi can do, he can just give a document to the wife and say, go ahead, borrow anything you want, and the tab will go on the husband, i.e. to sustain yourself. So you just go to the supermarket, go to Tesco, go to this, files up the trolley, and the Tesco just does it. The Qadi court has guaranteed payment on the tab of the husband. Point is, you need Qadis for Muslim marriage.
Yeah.
Whether there's a need for divorce settlement, Hanafis are quite restrictive on divorce, other schools are not. The Qadi is required for various forms of breaking up marriages as well. So, you need Qadis as a Muslim community. The fiqh books are saying if you don't have a ruler to create your Qadi, you have to appoint. Let's imagine the first Qadi. And let's imagine not nafaqah and payment, which requires what you've called power.
Yeah.
Let's just require divorcing people. That's what most Muslim Sharia councils are trying to do. Now, and let's not worry about the grounds for divorce, because like I said, some schools are much more restrictive than others. Let's just pretend there's agreed upon grounds for divorce. Let's picture the first divorce of the first Qadi in this neighborhood. Okay, let's not picture it anymore.
Let's do it.
Now you've pictured it. I thought actually we don't need to picture it. There's a fundamental problem with the divorce of the first Qadi. And the reason why is, my imagination is the whole community is not going to agree this guy is the Qadi.
Yeah.
You almost have to build that representation, but you only build it by doing Qadi things. So in the beginning moment, are your divorces, if you think of, again, if the hypothetical is divorce is the only act of this Qadi, and there are valid Sharia grounds for divorce, are his divorces really valid? Is he really a representative body or not? Or is it that after 100 divorces, everyone knows this guy legit is the Qadi? Like everyone's coming to him all over around. He's got an office. He's got people. He's got a waiting list, and everyone. He's established himself. So by the 100th divorce, there's no doubt the community sees this guy as a real force and presence, an expert and master. He's proved his skill at the craft, etc., etc. So there's a sort of ambiguity of divorce 1 to 100.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't do any of them, he'll never get to 100 when he really is a representative figure. And there's no, again, in the hypothetical where the divorce is all that he does, that how else is he going to be building up his case?
Well, what he could do is get a few scholars together, right? And that way you've got that collective. I think that then reduces the 0 to 100 to probably 0 to 20.
Yeah, correct.
And hopefully the scholars, they're not just people with knowledge, but they're also people with following. Because if you've got that, then you've got this very quick viral effect where this just becomes the go-to organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So all I can talk about are the two extremes.
Yeah.
And the truth is we're in the middle as a community. And the reason why I went to the extreme example is just to show that building representation, just with all the avenues that you've given, needs effort, needs thought, but it's typically, I don't think it'll be 100% success on day one. You're right, it might be at 20% or 30%. Think of the first Jumu'ahs. Like I have Where I live in southwest London, we have a very good, in our local area now, we rent a park hall and we have a very packed Jummah. That thing started with 3 people. That 3-man Jummah is invalid according to most of the jurists. Most Jummahs in our country start like that. You know, most of these, but that's the point. Our community stands, maybe that's a more, we talk about divorce and judges, very uncomfortable, you know, so let's now leave that on the side. It's about Jummah. Most Jummahs started, I will claim, as invalid Jummahs for most scholars.
And who appointed these guys anyway?
Exactly.
Like all they wanted to do was Jummah.
Exactly. But a few, like sometimes it's as short as 5 years, these become 100-man Jummahs. And then the person who literally was just a person who had an idea now becomes a community leader. He's organizing, he's phoning, he's calling imams, or he or she, sorry. But the point is, then it becomes a financially viable product. People are giving the donations, they're now building a mosque. So the point is, necessarily our community stands on the effort of small projects which win buy-in over time. And so all of these very complicated questions of what is representation, the truth is we are only here today because people have engaged in this way. They couldn't get to 100% by definition almost, because unless you use extreme violence, you use your power example, or extreme voting, which typically wouldn't, it's really the one that you call action. That's the real one. That's the one that's working in our communities. And you start with as much as you can, 20%, 30%, 40%, and through action, you try to get as close as you can to representation. And then a lot of these zakat questions, you know, these more complicated ones, like the political ones certainly, is in that space, I would say, in terms of the representative power to represent the community.
The other question I have is, I don't think in any country where you are in a minority, you are ever really going to get to a level of legitimacy and representation and organization that you would in a country, because that's essentially you challenging the sovereign, I think, at that point.
Correct.
At some level. And I think rightly, no country would allow that. In fact, even Muslim countries particularly don't allow that, right? They crush it very quickly. Now, that then raises the question of where does representation, legitimate representation, start? Because you know that you can never get to 100%. You know that you probably can't even get to, I don't know, 75%. And therefore, does it mean that I think the logical options therefore are that we either accept that there is a space for all this kind of stuff that otherwise would require a state, but it is allowed to be done in some other way, or we should be all in on getting the unity and setting up a state. I think those are the kind of 2 logical options, surely.
Okay, if you look at the Muslim majority setting, because you have power, and that's always been the reliance on unity. Unity requires power. That's how it was always seen. Appointment of your leadership structures did not require 100% unity. It required sufficient unity to be representative sufficiently to then have power. And then power is what creates unity. That's how all of these states and governments are. We have just a very interesting situation in our setup as a minority. What I'd like to stress to people is we really have to understand the importance of our being here in a country like the United Kingdom, or others who might be listening in other sort of minority settings. The reason why, classical scholars had a huge debate of should Muslims live in non-Muslim territories. Those who are favorable, certainly writers of the Shafi'i and Hanafi schools, certainly, they spoke really interesting ways about this. So for example, some of the Shafi'i scholars like Imam al-Mawardi, may Allah be pleased with him, he said if Muslims are in a non-Muslim setting and they're able to live and practice their faith in ways that we are, he said it's not allowed for them to leave. He said it's almost like you are representing Islam in that land. And he literally says they might become Muslim. And what he means by this, either they might become, but the point is they will benefit from you. You are good for them. You can't leave. And therefore the only option you have is to organize. I use the word organize because that's what unity is about. It's about, because you don't unify around an idea, you unify within structures. So in a family, we're constantly disagreeing. We all understand dad is dad or granddad is right. It's that kind of idea. So I agree with you. We need to create a sort of, you could call it social, political, religious theory for what are we trying to achieve, but there are things happening organically. Every community has mosques and leaders, and we have colleges and madrasas, and we have scholars that people are listening to, and we have all kinds of bodies like National Zakat Foundation, we've got Muslim Council of Britain, we've got all types of bodies. We have this. The question now becomes, because any community moves to organization in some way, how do we create an ummah narrative? So we realize that all ideological differences aside, we are duty bound to support each other. How to create an ummah narrative? And we already have these leadership pockets. How do we make it into a structure that works for the ummah? And the premise is the ummah will work for everyone. Again, just to say, it's not just an internal view. That's all that's left, I think. I agree with you. Aiming for 100% unity around the fabulous charismatic leader, that's not going to happen. And that's not expected. So that's all that's left, and that will create and empower a lot of very important fiqh conversations like the one that we're having around the mu'allafa, around all kinds of conversations.
One way of thinking about it is the whole Makkah and Medinan period, right? Where Prophet ﷺ, he only left Makkah when he was essentially kicked out, or there was a lot of pressure put on him where he was going to get killed, and that's the context to which he departed. And but before then, there wasn't this push necessarily to go to Medina immediately. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. So it could be that Imam Mawardi, he's saying that essentially we're in this Meccan context, but where there isn't necessarily as much animosity towards us, and therefore we should stay because our staying and our da'wah is beneficial, because that's what Rasulullah was doing in that situation. And it's only when you're pushed out then, and Prophet he did the same thing in Medina really. He went there and he gave da'wah. He did it remotely for a while, and then eventually it became so widespread that he became one of a few power brokers in that area, and then eventually the main power in that area. Maybe we should use the Meccan context to think about it.
I think 50-50. If just about the phrase, maybe kicked out, I don't think that's the best choice of phrase.
Sure, yeah.
Because it implies something in the relationship and a few other things as well. The Quran does say أَخْرَجَكَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, they expelled you. It does put agency to them. What I will say is definitely the movement to Medina was, if you want to talk theologically, it was intended by God, because there's a very different character and nature of what happens in Medina. And therefore, this notion of creating, you could call it a political view, a civilizational view, is intended by the sacred law. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't enter Medina as one force among many. He entered as the person in charge of Medina. That was the terms on which he entered. And so there are some difference. But what I would say to you is, why I'm saying 50-50, I think yes, the Meccan precedent corresponds to our reality here, but the difference is we have the Sharia. And what do I mean by that? Is that when people have this conversation of Mecca versus Medina, they kind of forget that just one detail. There are no 5 prayers in Mecca, there's no structured zakat in Mecca, there's no masajid in Mecca, there's no Jumu'ah in Mecca. So unless you're claiming to drop everything, those things are intrinsically civilizational institutions. And that's the point of our conversation. Zakat is not just a private duty. I'm saying we as a community I'm going to say, are duty bound to organize through the teachings of zakat and prayer and qada, because each of them are an angle of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to live as ummah, as community, as structured. Always remembering there's a foundation of belief that has to unite us and organize us, upon which we can have academic debates or ethnical differences, but not that foundation.
Sure.
That's the izz, if you like, of Islam, that we are duty bound to support. That's why even in Mecca now we have sharia, and it should guide us in how to be organized.
Are we saying that once the Prophet died, we've got this entire sharia is done and dusted? Or perhaps the Hanafis would say once the, let's say, I don't know, the four Khalifas have been and gone as well, it's done and dusted, and after that everything is just a footnote? Or are we saying that actually the sharia that we have been given is so rich that it can be adapted into lots of different circumstances? And if that is the case, then surely it means that we can, at some level suspend certain things, and at some level not suspend certain things. Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely the answer is both. We gave the example earlier of Sayyidina Umar quite literally suspending stroke cancelling, however you want to interpret it, a clear statement of the Holy Quran. That's pretty extreme, and it's recorded in all the zakat discussions. And there's a few other examples you can give. So the Islamic sacred law is...
And so just picking up on that though, so Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, Islam is now powerful, therefore we don't need it. So we could take by that, therefore we don't need it for all time, or whenever Islam is powerful, we don't need it. And right now, I would say Islam is not powerful, therefore we need it.
And categorically, you'd have to say the latter. And that's why all the other schools still theorize it, but it's tied to this head of state figure in the political interpretation. And even the Hanafis have this internal debate. Do you call this abrogation? Do you call it, no, the reason is gone, when the reason comes back, it comes back. And you really have to allow for that, because that's exactly what the reasoning is behind the ruling. But coming back to your question, so first of all, categorically, the Islamic sacred law, the Islamic legal tradition, it was the cornerstone of Islamic civilization, this discipline. And it's a discipline that has informed Muslim civilizations across the last 1400 years in different times, different challenges, and the brilliance of Islamic scholarship has shone in all of those periods. So definitely, there is a need in every time and place for brilliance of a scholarly community to interpret how best to implement and live the sacred law. However, we have to always remember an ideal, because there has to be a direction of travel. There has to be an idea of where are we trying to go next? What are we trying to achieve now? What are the most important things when we prioritize our judgment? We need that. And that's why studying a classical fiqh, studying the life of our Prophet ﷺ will always be the cornerstone of informing and guiding. But it has to be interpreted, filtered, contextualized through brilliant, considered, collective, empowered Islamic scholarship, because that's how it's always been.
So are you setting up the scholar king at this point?
Not necessarily.
Because in a way, that's what we do in the West, I think. In this Muslim world, the people with the real authority, one could argue, is possibly the uncle in the masjid, or Sheikh Yasir Qadi, or Sheikh Sohail Hanif, or Sheikh Haytham al-Haddad. They're the ones who have the maximum authority in the minority Muslim community.
Yeah, for sure. But we have to realize, and that's what I'm getting at, which is we want to move beyond just uplifting people who uplift to actually a vision for our community. And I'm simply calling it organization and representation.
Sure.
And I'm saying it's already happening, because it always happens. That's how that's just a part of how people are. And so therefore, the leaders of our community will always be scholars, because scholars define the direction of travel, of what we are, what we represent, and what we have to be, what our ideals are. But we have all kinds of people. We have thought leaders. We have, again, institutional leaders. We have, whether it's charity projects, which are sometimes very impactful in our community. There are an incredible number of under-the-radar charity projects, and people, therefore, who are community leaders, not through scholarship, but through action, extreme action. We've got umbrella bodies. We've got Council of Mosques in Bradford. We've got Council of Mosques in Luton. People say, oh, they don't do anything. That's not the point. Yeah. The umbrella's there. That means they've committed to something. Let's fill that commitment with good action. That's the idea. We've got Muslim Charities Forum. Some people say, oh, they don't do much. That's not the point again. We've got so many structures. How can we empower them and imbue them with a baseline message, which is, again, I've started with it today because it's so important, I feel, at the heart of this, which is our Prophet ﷺ, the Sharia he brought. At the heart of it is faith is family. We have to have a concern for ummah wherever we live. And that concern is expressed through coming together, strengthening our ties. Zakat is a cornerstone of that. Prayers in mosque are a cornerstone of that. And there's an entire community we have to build. We've got a lot of building blocks already. We've got great community leaders already. It's just, what's the next step? And that's a room for thought and communication. It doesn't have to end with Scholar King. It can end with something quite different. But there must be scholars and there must be community leaders.
Yeah. Maybe another way to attack it is to say that, okay, where is there an uncontested leader? At what level of scale can we get to where it's clear that that's the leader? And I would argue that's the household, where you've got the husband or the man. I mean,
I don't know if the kids in the household would agree with that.
Yeah, or the kids or the woman maybe at this point. But like,
exactly.
So let's say we agree, accept that, at least, do lip service to it.
Yeah, sure.
And so the man is now the representative of the household, and that's really from like basic biology. Really, that's the power bit. I would say. I would argue. And then the next link along is the masjid, the local masjid, where all of the different families congregate, and certain families may not be Muslim, may not be practicing, and so they're not really part of the community, right? There's obviously a scale, but like generally speaking, the Muslim community will congregate in the masjid, and I think this is where we have the first layer of breakdown, because there isn't the infrastructure given in typical masjid for people to insert themselves in to the community, right? And that for there to be a flourishing activity happening, but also B, just the actual boring like articles of association and like trusteeship and all of that stuff. If you're hitting a wall there and you're not really moving further from that, what happens after this is these masajid would presumably get together in that area and say, all right, I'm the imam, I'm this of that of the masjid, and therefore we can collectively decide for, I don't know, Luton, this is what we should do. But if you're hitting a representation issue here, then it's we kind of struggle after that. And then I think, but let's say we solve that, and let's say we get to the center, the Council of Mosques, and they can be good or bad, but there's a bunch of actions that it's clear that they need to be doing, and they do that, and then they feed into something, I don't know, like the MCB or these kind of national level organizations, and again they've got a clear role and they stick to that. I don't really know where I'm going with this question. I'm just kind of like
you're painting out a possible future, and that's what I'm saying. If you want to call it a minority faith-based political theory, there will be possibilities here, and we have to have a space where we can explore them and make plans of travel, while realizing that in the real world we don't have ideals in these things. So it could be in one area a council of mosques is useless. And some people do an alternative thing and it does really well. And we have to commit to, that's what I said, the baseline. We have to support all good work. And we have to have a narrative on every pulpit and every newsletter and every organization about our most fundamental commitment to each other and the thriving of each other. Because again, that's the prophetic teaching, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that the community is a body and we have to care for the body. We're here for each other because that's what he wanted for us, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and what he left for us. We owe it to him, to this heritage that he brought, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from us. That's it. That narrative has to be piercing, and it's not.
Yeah.
And with that, we'll have pathways. We'll organize through this, organize through that. Let's all come together. Because at the end of the day, Muslim community is maturing. We do know which people we want around the table, depending on which conversation. It's just the narrative has to be clearer on the grassroots. Draw up particular pathways, empower each other, support all good work.
Yeah.
And then see, again, there's a sort of destiny, see where things take us,
Yeah.
if that makes any sense. Islamic history was like that, see where things take us. There's different actors. One last thing, if I can say, but you're about to say a question, then I'll say my last thing.
Yeah.
Go on.
I was going to say the digital aspect of this
Digital.
throws everything up in the air.
Yep.
Because if we think about our waking hours of, let's say, 16, 18 hours, and about 10 of those arguably are in front of a screen, or at some level interacting with a human being via the medium of some screen. And even allegiance these days is actually not really to our local area. Like, I don't actually know who our neighbors are even in this office, whereas I know you, and I know some, Yaqeen Institute somewhere in America, at a deeper level that I know my neighbor.
Yeah.
And so we've got this kind of digitization of the human experience. That throws up other interesting questions of, does that mean that, we're now not talking about the nation state or physical space, we're talking about something else, right? This kind of idea of a minority in the West. So where I'm going here with this is that you can almost end up with another level of, representation through action, or, following through something as banal as YouTube subscribers, or the number of likes on Facebook, or, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of now becomes the representative of clout in that space.
I think all I'll say here, seeing as I'm in a completely different league than you in YouTube subscribers, so I can't actually vie with you with the metric you've just mentioned. But staying with what you've raised, one thing I will say is we have to validate the human experience. That's the beginning of fiqh. You can't say, no, it's wrong to have virtual relationships.
Yeah.
It is real. These are real, it's a real part of how we live. These are communities. And so we just have to put that into our narrative. Again, as we're thinking about it, what's our responsibility to our virtual family?
Yeah.
And what's our, you can say right responsibility? How do we empower each other across borders? You're right, it's outside of nation state. We didn't bring up nation state today. We kind of did, indirectly. So all I'll say is it's correct what you're saying. It's a valid part of our experience, and it has to build into our narrative of how do we empower a sense of belonging and commitment to the collective. And there has to be a digital part to that theory, if you like. One thing I was about to say, then I see that you're hesitating momentarily
go for it.
Thinking. So we were talking about representative bodies, supporting the good work. I want to say just one last thing, which is our theory of leadership is really important. Because representation is about leadership. And there's just something to keep in mind. We have a very interesting tension with leadership in the Islamic tradition. In that, first of all, by definition, there can never be an absolute leader, because what we are, in the broader sense of the word leader, because we are all followers of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and those most worthy to lead us are those who are best in following. So there's just this clash right there. If you follow well, maybe you'll be a good leader. There's no absoluteness, and it's really important to get that clear. And the other thing is, interesting things also in the Islamic tradition, which is leadership shouldn't be sought. It is conferred. Okay, who's conferring? Obviously there's another part to that. But what I mean by all of this, if you look at the people who probably are leaders in the narrative we've been building up, who have been built, they've run mosque communities and they've got these, most of them were just people serving and trying to do something good. It never occurred to them that they're going to become representative leaders. But they're the people who've now become movers and shakers because they really spent a lot of time in service. So I just want to just add that into the mix, that it is about service. It is about doing what is good for the community. There is an organic part to this conversation. We're just coming in post that and saying, well, how can we structure that for maximum advantage today and for better travel tomorrow?
So Sheikh, I want to get into some of the latter categories of zakat as well. But I wanted to perhaps just do an example of how we would apply mu'allafat al-Qulub. And I'm thinking soft power, I'm thinking movies, social media, YouTube, I'm thinking newspapers, and Muslims spending through that medium, whether that's buying certain things, starting off certain projects, or buying ads perhaps in those areas, basically spending and using money to gain soft power. How do we think about that from a zakat perspective?
Yeah, it's tricky. That's the most I can say with my level of ability. And the reason why it's tricky, there's a reason why you will see modern fatwas on setting up an educational institution. You might find fatwas on supporting da'wah projects. Other than that, if you look at the modern fatwas that seem to be stretching the boundaries, they'll talk about wells or they'll talk about mosques. That's the point of debate. But what do all these have in common is that they're seen as being needs that the community can easily grasp. Let's just say like that first of all. So when you talk about buying a media outlet or any of the examples that you've just given, it's not easy to grasp. How are you going to make sure that this is going to be good, effective, meaningful, etc.? Then there's the absolutely other scale of cost, which also comes into this. Because in other words, there's in any territory in which you occupy, there'll be a finite amount of zakat. And so there'll be very straightforward needs that the community has. You're taking all of them for a very niche thing. Then the question is, are you doing this as a representative leader? Are you doing it privately? All these factors will come into it. But I think that's the reason why it's not common to hear these questions or hear them answered. They're not part of the normal sort of controversy. They're not, part of the normal controversial debates, if you like. So I'll just say it's hard to have a clear answer which is zakat based to this. And again, I'm saying from my capacity. I'm not saying that you can't answer it.
Sure.
And the other thing I'll say is, what we can do from this is to get certainly a guideline from the zakat. And what does that mean? Because zakat is an institution which is foundational, and every foundation informs the building that has to come on top of it. And so zakat has informed discussions that led to your question. So is your question a good thing to be done? Does the sacred law support such kinds of strategic thinking and activity? I would say yes. Is it a way that we should be thinking? I would say yes, because you can derive that from the discussions that we've just been having. All that remains is, should you be doing this with zakat funds? Whose zakat funds? Are there any prerequisites to your being in a position to use zakat funds in that way? And after that, the propositions won't all be equal in the likelihood of impact. So how do you make a case for this kind of spend? Because the examples I gave you of the political informing zakat, it was still in the framing of giving money to an influential person. It's much closer to the lobbying kind of soft power. In the modern political structure, it's heavily influenced by money, as we all know, and it's done in this very traditional way. Paying for so-and-so's campaign, paying for so-and-so, such and such. That's close to that level. Media wasn't, It's clearly in that space. It should have an answer. It's just another step removed. So how do you make the case for it? Because the case for influencing an influential person politically, the classical fiqh discusses that model, and it's the person is a leader amongst the people. You know, there's a way to translate. So you just have to translate the kind of influence of media, make the case for why this form of media exposure will have a particular output, then figure out your standing in all of that, and then you'll get a sort of answer.
Yeah.
I can't answer it in any categoric way.
Yeah, makes sense. And I don't think we necessarily need to answer it. I think it's just more putting the framework in place. So I think one way to think about it is that in today's day and age, media is. So why would Prophet ﷺ give zakat money to people who are leaders of tribes, or even non-Muslim leaders to kind of buy them off, right? Part of it is because these people had influence. So like one could argue that the influence aspect is a key aspect here. And in today's day and age, you could argue that politicians, there's only about 20 of them who actually have influence. The rest of them are just there for show. And actually the influence lies in other places. And so that's the kind of extrapolation. And of course, I mean, I hear the point around not taking $500 million or $1 billion of the zakat money and putting it all into buying, I don't know, like a wing of Sky News. But the other interesting thing that I think that we were discussing before about how, is this your money, or is this money given to you for this mandate, or is it kind of more general and you're in effect taking a punchy view on it without necessarily the buy-in of the community, which I think is a fair point. And I think there should be buy-in. But then if that is the case, then are we not then saying, because this goes to the political theory question, which is that are we not then saying really it's about who wins the debate as opposed to consensus building or giving authority, or because that aspect of it is if what I'm trying to say is that winning the debate is the only way that it's possible for us to do something that is a little bit more adventurous, or a little bit out of the everyone agrees with this perspective.
First of all, we've already discussed, when we did our micro-political theory, we looked at the Qadi's 100 divorces, or we looked at the Jumu'ahs of 3 people. We said that there is something, you don't get to 100%, you aim for 100%, but there has to be some threshold at which we say, this is legitimate activity. So into our theory, we're going to draw it just to realize 100% is not necessarily what we're targeting, but some practical level. The other thing that comes to mind is a third avenue. The third avenue is as follows, which is you raise funds specifically for this purpose. And what that means is that, as you know, our Islamic tradition is vast. There will be positions of respectable scholars who feel they can answer this question definitively. You will find respectable scholars who will definitively say you should buy Sky News, and they have a clear view, precedent, etc. And let's say if all the scholars of the UK are 10, maybe you've got 1. Or if they say UK scholars are 100, you might get 3, let's just say. But they're respectable, and UK is not the be-all and end-all of scholarship. You've got a whole world of scholarship to pack in. So what I'm trying to get at is, you get a scholarly input, you get guidelines, you're committed to it. And then you lay out a position paper. You say, our project, which is project by Sky or something, we have these fatwas, we have these authorities. Whoever believes in this, and you agree with it, give us your money. That way there is no question of representative body and all that complication. It's really straightforward, which is you have a position, you've argued for it, you have authority figures, and you have a group of people who like the idea. And then you don't have any complications. You are just representing a finite group of givers who've already said use the money exactly for this purpose. So it's not you and your own money, which probably wouldn't be enough to buy whatever the media channel is. And it's not you as the Khalifa of Britain trying to figure out a public mandate, which I think is required, but I agree with you, it'll be slow. But there's something else, which is just have a project, get guidelines, be transparent, share the arguments, and as long as you genuinely believe
Yeah.
it's correct, and the people paying you genuinely believe it's correct, then you have that mandate.
Yeah. So I think that's actually the win the argument. I mean, this is just nomenclature.
Yeah.
But I think essentially that's what you're saying.
Because large bodies move slowly.
Yeah.
There's a space for large bodies. I think it's a requirement.
Yeah.
But projects won't always benefit by being tied to that. That's just the nature of what you're moving.
Yeah. We should carry on with the categories, but one side mission I want to go on at this point is what do you think about how fast scholars should move? And what I mean by that is that we banned the micro. This is technically haram, right? In like 70, 80 years ago, when microphones first came out, they weren't allowed in the masajid.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that. You can,
So
okay, fine.
So there was, and then TVs are still not allowed, I think, in many Deobandi kind of traditions. And then cryptocurrency is, I guess, a recent one. I'm sure there's people who are concerned about artificial intelligence. And what I'm saying is that the actual facts on the ground are, just because of the nature of how things have accelerated, that we are, as a civilization, moving faster than we've ever moved before. And I fear that our scholarly tradition, well, maybe not tradition, but our current scholarship and perhaps the funding of it or the way that it's done, one could argue that is, it's moving too slowly in order to keep up with what's happening live on the ground.
Yeah, so just two points here perhaps. So first thing is just, there's a natural tension within fiqh, that our great civilizational discipline of how to live in the world, is that the fiqh tradition presents an ideal of how things should be, which scholars have to represent to people. You know, what is respectable marriage? What is honorable trade? What is the right way to do zakat, for example? There's another part of fiqh, which is very important to the fiqh tradition, which is telling people how they can actually live today, in their moment. For example, I always give the example, if there was no food in the world except pork, fiqh is not to tell people pork is haram. That's not useful or meaningful or implementable. All that the fiqh would tell people is, how would you eat pork in this pork-filled world? You know, don't enjoy it, don't eat your fill, only eat enough to stay alive, with a bit of a debate on what if you eat enough to stay alive but not pray standing, what's the priority? And that's how it works. So always we'll have to show you how you can live, but it does chart a course on what the future is that we should be moving towards. And people of this tradition have to juggle both. That's why when there's quick change, it's correct, but for the learned community to be cautious, because they're fully aware when they legitimize, they are accelerating a change in society. And most changes are scary. When money goes digital, and who's controlling you, and who's controlling this, and who's in charge anymore? Because even paper money is quite dodgy. It's all debts and interest and so on. So this is more worthy of being called haram. But at one point you realize it's like the pork-filled world. You're there, you have to tell people how to live. And now we've got used to it, now this other money's come about. So it's like, where did that come from now? So there's a natural tendency that, people would be cautious, put the brake on it, and it makes sense, because they have to kind of bear the trust of the community, and things do often have strange outputs if you think about it. But at the same time, when such changes are widely adopted, the fiqh tradition demands consideration from its scholars, because what is the failure of the learned community is when they leave the public alone. Again, the idea that everything is haram. You can't do the mortgage, and you can't do that, and you can't do the finance. It's a bit technically, you can't. When you have too many can'ts, what you're telling the Muslim public is, we can't help you. And then what you're telling the Muslim public, you come up with your own things, we don't have anything for you. A learned community that says that has betrayed their tradition, betrayed their trust, betrayed their position. That's the sinful red line that they can't cross. So as long as they realize that to stay with the community, then that's the juggle. So all I mean to say is it will always be a tension like that of not allowed, okay, now it's allowed. Not allowed, okay, it's allowed, but do this. Not allowed, but half people say it's allowed, half people say it's not allowed, like your pictures or your cameras or all of that stuff. So it's natural, it's part of the craft, it's needed, etc.
Yeah.
The last thing about what you were hinting at though, is the pace of, are we structurally ready for a world that's changing so much? And that's where I'd say it's good for us to create a living scholarly space. So for example, what do I mean by that? I used to say this a long time ago, and I've not had a conversation like this for a long time, but if you look at Islamic scholarship in a place like the UK, the assumption is, just I'm speaking impressionistically, you have people who maybe traveled, learned, came back and teach. Learning and teaching is only half of the scholarly craft. The other half is about creating knowledge, having insights, addressing something new. You have to be empowered structurally to do that. Our Muslim scholarly scene is not structurally created to empower profound, creative, engaged scholarly thought. This happens right now as an accident. Like, I like it, so I stay up all night doing X, Y, Z, but it's not expected of my craft. Whereas if I were in the Western university scene, it's expected in my craft that I'm not paid to teach. That's just the thing I do as a professor. I'm paid to write. And I'm paid to review the writings of others. And so if I want to stay in academia, I must create, I must engage, I must think, I must be original, and I must be debating. And when you do that, you create living solutions. So 90% of what the academics do, the public doesn't understand or care for or think it's relevant. But 10% will always filter down to our education, to our inventions, and we stay current. Islamic history and tradition was always like that. But right now, we were so much in a survival mode, we haven't created structures to cultivate learning. We only have structures to create learning and pass it on in terms of the main focus. And so I think there's a structural problem. I think we do need to address it. And if we do address it well, it will allow for a better pace of engagement than maybe we currently have.
Yeah, I think that's really at the heart of what I see as the issue, because you're right. Scholars are not; they don't have the funding or the structure to be able to think about this stuff, or even frankly the training sometimes, or highly technical stuff, to be able to engage with it, because it's just so. There's so many layers to understanding, I don't know, artificial intelligence or, I don't know, cryptocurrency or whatever new thing comes along, that unpacking that in itself takes a lot of effort. And I wonder if there's almost like a space for like a sandbox or like a test area where, because my fear here is that you have these big mega waves that come, and now we're thinking about political theory, and we're thinking about Islam and the Ummah, and increasing the strength of the Ummah, and the way that really happens is you jump onto these mega trends, for example climate change, or for example artificial intelligence, or whatever other major trends that have been, and that's how enormous amounts of wealth and power and influence are suddenly created because of paradigm shifts. And that's just the way that the world is these days. It's not about military, it's not about navies, it's not about who has nuclear weapons. That's part of it still, but this is the new kind of wave. And we are, as a community, because we are not able to move fast enough to allow entrepreneurs the space to operate in these frontier lands, we essentially, 2 years later, or 5 years later, we're still kind of umming and ahhing about, oh right, okay, is it okay or not? By that time, it's already moved on. By that time, it's a new thing, and because it's so incremental, this especially technology, that you can't catch up after that. That's the kind of the concern I have.
It's a very valid concern, and all I will say, and it's part of the human nature as well, that usually people aren't waiting for a fatwa to try something.
Yeah.
And so it's just getting that, again, getting an engaged scholarly space present, because the truth is, I don't think fatwas are holding people back.
Yeah.
It's just it can create lack of clarity. a good fatwa creates clarity. A good fatwa can encourage something. I don't think Muslims have not entered crypto because there's confused fatwa. I think they're entering crypto because there's particular advantages they're seeing. But if there was engaged scholarship, it can give guidelines, it can encourage, it might accelerate some things. So it's just that balance. But I wouldn't say Muslims are always going to be held back because scholars aren't the first crypto kings of the Muslim world. I don't think it's like that either.
Fine, side mission over. Let's actually get back to Mu'allafat al-Qulub. I think we've engaged with that.
Do you think so?
وفي الرقاب والغارمين وفي سبيل الله.
If we do it in order, as quickly as possible. So fir riqab is about freeing slaves. Scholars had technical debates on what this meant. So for the Hanafis, because it really was about a transfer of ownership to this eligible recipient, they said the slave has to be someone who has a particular contract with his or her master to work for their own freedom. Again, must be a very strange topic for those who never engaged with pre-modern slavery. But you have to find someone in such an arrangement and you pay them the money and it's part of their payment for their freedom. Sticking to the principle, it's about giving ownership of something to somebody who can take advantage. Others were happy with, not all of them, amongst other positions were, you can use the money straight to the slave owner and say, I'm buying the slave from you. So here, the transfer is going straight to a rich, non-eligible, but the consequence is you're freeing a human being. So that's just a small debate there. The most important contemporary discussion is just, does this have any consequence now when slavery is illegal internationally? It's not a category anymore. All I will say in my awareness of this is what's interesting is that there's definitely a category called modern slavery. People are using the term a lot. It's a spectrum of what it means to different people. In the most extreme case, it's people who are literally brought to England, for example, passports taken, work all day night in a factory and actually have no rights. It could be sexual labor related, it could be actual other labor related. And in a nation like ours, which we think is really modern, there's people who are really imprisoned in very strange debt-based arrangements to be like this. So people talk about releasing them from their situation is a good, valid application of this. The truth is, I consider this non-controversial. The reason why is, in majority of these cases, if not all of them, they will be technically poor, technically in debt. I mean, it's not a technical debate. The only debate here is what's the right way to do this, basically. So, but what we can get, what I said, get the ethic out of the zakat rules is there's an impetus put on us. Remember I said, what if you read it like a Hanafi from the beginning? Why the other categories after Amilin is it's telling people it's not about dirt poor. You've got to really take care of the whole spectrum of the Muslims around you. And you've got to think especially hard, if you're a zakat administrator, about the hidden poverty and hidden social ills that might not be evident. You can't just go for the guy on the street, because if I'm always going for the guy on the street who's homeless, I'm almost telling people, become homeless and then you'll get zakat. And that's not the point. The point is we're uplifting the entire community. To do that, you've got to, with your skill set and administrative ability, know what's happening in all the homes. What is the exploitation in my community? What are the where people are breaking economically? And that's what even reading it like a Hanafi, that's what it's saying. People have to be in need between the middle and the maximum. But think about people who are not in public. Think about people who are in really imprisoned arrangements. You don't even see them normally. Think about the stranger. Think about this. So administratively, it's pushing for extreme awareness of the different forms of financial difficulty. And all of the verse is against this notion, it's only for the dirt poor, the homeless, people who have nothing, which is the public narrative. That I don't want to be poor myself, my zakat only goes overseas in the most dire setup. The verse is against all of that. Even the most basic poverty reading, that you have to think about these situations and find solutions. So I'd say therefore, the verse is telling us as a community, we haven't succeeded yet with zakat. If amongst us are people who are in some extremely restrictive arrangements, and we have to find a way to free them of that so they can be dignified parts of society. That's what I'll say.
Makes sense. And thinking about modern applications of that, two come to mind. One is you've got prisoners of war, or you've got prisoners in, like, let's say places like Guantanamo where they're held without charge. Or Sheikh Qardawi, he came up with a kind of interesting colonialism.
Qardawi. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
apparently there's a debate on that. Someone was saying it's actually Qardawi.
That's people who don't like him.
Okay, right.
Because it's about the person in debt.
Okay,
it's a refutation label.
Okay, fine.
His name is Qardawi.
Fine.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, I think I got confused. So Qaradawi or Qardawi?
Oh, yes.
So it's
this I can't remember. Sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Anyway, him.
Yeah.
This we know who we're referring to. He came up with an interesting concept of colonialism and how this could be this is a modern form of like servitude and enslavement, and we need to work hard to overthrow that. So yeah, some modern examples, thoughts.
Sorry. What is it about colonialism? Getting the
it's
freeing ourselves from colonialism.
Yeah,
but that's the entire enterprise of throwing out a foreign force.
Yeah, it's like the yoke of enslavement, or kind of you've got Darth Vader, ruling over you as your overlord, and therefore that needs to be overthrown. So is that enterprise?
Yeah, but then that could be any one of our conversation points. We're going to come to fi sabilillah. It could be because in this al-Riqab we're talking about someone or a group who don't have what other people have, and they're in a restrictive arrangement they can't break free of.
Apartheid.
And we're going to, but then still with apartheid, I can't help a person in apartheid.
Yeah.
I've got to change an entire political system.
Yeah.
Which is probably closer to some of the other conversation we've been having, whether it's the lobbying, whether it's, we're going to come to the fi sabilillah. So I'm just saying it's possible. I mean, it's
Fine.
a good, what I call drawing from the ethic, but it might not be the exact, closest item to the thing that we're looking at.
What about the prisoner stuff?
Prisoners, it definitely is much, much closer if it were that easy.
Yeah.
In fact, it's super close. In fact, what's the most likely equivalent question? Someone's been wrongly in prison in some country that's not being good with Muslims or so on. For example, the Guantanamo. But I have a contact who knows a jailer.
Yeah.
If you grease his hand, whatever the phrase. If you just give him X amount, he'll do something to just let the guy go during some time that they have in prison. Is that a good zakat payment? So I think that's a very valid question. Like I said, some scholars had a great technicality about, who's receiving the money, who's the wakil of who has to, but if you ignore the technicality, because like I said right at the beginning, some scholars will find us giving it to the rich guy if it leads to the emancipation. I think it's a very valid and strong angle.
What about legal costs? Because that's
actually closest to this. Legal costs is just one step removed. Reason why it's one step removed is you're not paying for his freedom. You're just praying for someone who's going to put effort that might or might not have consequence. And again, could be very costly. So I would put this in this fi sabilillah thing we're going to come to, which is someone doing public service at some level. It's not really, paying a lawyer is nothing to do with freeing a person. It's just hopefully going to end up there.
All right, well, let's move on to Gharimin.
So,
and then we're inching towards fi sabilillah. I don't know if there's much to be said about Gharimin. It's quite the debt.
There's tons. Your mortgage question is going to come up now.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Because we live in the ultimate debt economy.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
So Gharimin is people in debt. And before we go anywhere, we just realize this again from the ethic of the Sharia. What is the Sharia asking us to build in our community on top of the foundation of zakat? It is a society that sees debt as burden, that sees debt as unfortunate, that sees debt as something communally we want to get each other out of. That's just the ethic at the heart of why the people in debt are in the zakat. It's like if we've got some communal zakat we've gathered and there's some poor souls in debt, please get them out of it.
In a way, they're like the riqab.
It is exactly like the riqab, and in the old ancient world, again, Islam stopped this, but debt was one of the most basic ways to enslave people. And that's why our Prophet ﷺ, he didn't say debt was bad, sometimes you have to borrow, but there's this idea that debt is a burden you want to get out of. And it's something we should try to get each other out of. And so it's something for us in our wider theorizing of our view to how to develop our community, is to almost have just a room in our think tank as we're developing these ideas. What's our position on communal debt? And the weird thing is, we inhabit the most strange debt-based economy. If you're not in debt, it's like you don't exist. If you're not in debt, most likely you'll never get a roof over your head that you can call yours. If you're not in debt, it's really strange. It's the weirdest enslavement that we're in, with the exploitation of the usury on top of that. Actually, usury is why we have a debt-based economy. So it's a difficult one, but it's really trying to figure out what's our position on debt for our community, and how do we have a narrative that's debt suspicious. I think that's important as far as the ethic is concerned. As far as the questions are concerned, the most obvious question is, so-and-so has a £300,000 mortgage, should we all give him our zakat, for example? The problem, so on base level, the answer is yes. You can say, well, he was wrong for him to get into this debt.
Sure, yeah.
Fine. But at the same time, he's in a situation, on face value, he's perfectly valid to receive this from us. You could argue, if we kept doing it in cycles, we'll slowly all become house owners or something, and it's good for the community. Make an argument like that. The downside of that is, let's think about zakat paying. Because zakat payers subtract their debts, and what's left over, if it's above a nisab, they pay zakat. If you were to say that a mortgage arrangement is a regular debt you're going to be subtracting, what you're going to be ending up saying is, rich people don't pay zakat, only poor people pay zakat, because rich people can afford mortgages, poor people cannot. So the poor guy who's renting, who's got a little bit left over, he has to pay zakat. And the rich guy who's got one property on mortgage, and maybe a second one, and maybe he's got all these sports cars on mortgage, he's the indebted one. We're all freeing him. So because our debt-based economy favors the rich within its debt, it's the weirdest thing. It's very confusing to just make mortgages and all of these long-term debt arrangements as things that will take you out of being a zakat payer and that make you a primary zakat recipient, because it's a system that will end up favoring the rich. And our society already favors the rich, and zakat was meant to be the opposite of that movement, which is why the most common fatwas on this, long-term arrangements, are all about one year increments, which is, you could say arbitrary, because it could have been less, could have been a month, could have been ignore it all, could have been account it all. So it's not that it's technically the only way to look at this, but it's a fair practical medium. Exactly, which is just, what's your debt for the year? Just take that into account, and we'll work on that. So you could argue for paying off all mortgages. It is quite possible, but these are the fiddly points of that. Plus, it's, again, I always remind, it's very costly. And there's always opportunity cost. If I help one guy get a house, what about all the other guys who can't even afford rent? So it's just that part of it as well.
Maybe this is one from al-Qulub, because if you're buying out non-Muslims and their debt, it doesn't affect this argument about Muslims and whether or not it counts as, I guess, arguably you could say it does.
You have to explain that.
So what I'm saying is that you could say that, okay, we don't we don't see Islamic mortgages as debt in the conventional sense, and therefore naturally all Muslims will be taking out Islamic mortgages, so it's fine. Whereas conventional mortgages are debt, and therefore we'll pay that off because those guys are in debt, and it's actually more, rather than Gharimin, it's more just al-Qulub.
Okay, so we're not going to help Muslims get the houses, we're going to help non-Muslims get the houses.
Exactly.
To facilitate
coming to Islam.
Okay. If you had a Muslim pot saying, if you convert today, we will pay off the next year or two of your mortgage.
Perfect.
This fits within one of the sort of angles we have been discussing previously. This is possible in the framework we've been looking at.
Write that down, Khidr. Sheikh Akram had a good point about this. He was talking about how you've got a widower, someone passes away, who's going to pay the mortgage in that situation? So that was, I thought that was quite a good example of
And again, that's non-controversial because at the end of the day, That's why I said, when you look at poverty as the main entry point, it answers most of these questions, because this person, the lady, she has the right to a home. Her monthly payment is part of her very basic expenses. So every month she's in actual debt. That debt will be over several months, and these are non-controversial applications. We might call it an application of one of these strange categories or thing people haven't heard of, but these are quite non-controversial statements, and it makes complete sense.
So talking of non-controversial, should we move on to Fi Sabilillah?
Which is completely non-controversial. So Fi Sabilillah, if we just look at the traditional, classical, before we look at the new. So Fi Sabilillah means in the way of God. In the way of God, when used in the Quran, certainly in the Medinan surahs, it is connected to this activity of exerting effort to defend the Muslim polity, primarily with military activity. So, I'm not saying exclusively, but there's a sort of understanding of this label. So, in early Islam, and that's how the fiqh books, because they're really describing early practice in the fiqh, and then we use the principles to apply it to later circumstances. In early Islam, there was no such thing as a standing army. There was no professional army. I've already told you, it was seen as you couldn't tax to pay soldiers. So where the salary is going to come from? So you just have a regular life. You might work on the farm or be a businessman or be anything else in life. And then suddenly a call will come. There's a campaign. There's a threat. There's something we're going out for. We need X number of strong men. Please sign up. So you're joining for honor, for virtue, and these sort of incentives. Sure. You pay your own way. It's costly. It's like Hajj. In Hajj, you pay your own way. That's why you don't have to do Hajj. If you can't afford how to look after your family while you're gone, the payment for your animal while you're going, etc. That's why many scholars actually included Hajj. I'll come back to this one into Fi Sabilillah. Not going on Hajj, but let's say I'm on the way of Hajj and I get stuck. Many call this Fi Sabilillah, that you're just paying for them to continue and then come back home because they ran out of their money during their Hajj journey. So think about the military, it's kind of like that. It's costly. So I'm not wealthy, I actually don't fight. And these ancient Roman, if you look at all these ancient civilizations, you had to be, I used to listen to these History of Rome podcasts. So what happened was, if you're not a landowner, you wouldn't be a soldier, you wouldn't be a legionary. So it's already like an upper class thing to take part in war and conquest. Yeah. It's not, so if you look at early Islam, if you're well-to-do, you look after your family, you already have horses, you already got swords, you already got armor, and you go out. You spend all of this just to get yourself out. What's the financial thing at the financial light at the end of the tunnel is if you win, then there's an incentive because you have a share in the spoils. So it's not, there is something that could work out in your favor, or you might die, but you're paying your own way. What about people who can't afford to go? So this Zakat Fi Sabilillah was for those people, that there's a public need. So the military effort is necessary for any community to survive. There's conversations right now as we're talking about the virtues of conscription and related. Of course, So, but by the grace of Allah, we don't live in primarily a war period, and we're kind of not used to that way of thinking, at least in our arrangement, to live in safety. But human history is not like that, and politics isn't like that. So the war effort always is at the forefront. And so the idea is, we do need people to defend us. Not everyone can afford to defend us. And if we're not defending ourselves, we're not defending our borders, then what's all this thriving that we're going to be doing inside? That's why it's explicitly mentioned within the Quranic Zakat categories that the implication would be some governmental decision, that this is a good fighter, he's worthy of, give him. So some scholars say you give them money and they'll equip themselves. Other scholars are fine with it. You give them a horse, give them a sword, give them all of this stuff. It's transfer of ownership, and now they can join the effort. Give them sustenance to travel, look after their dependents, etc. That's Fi Sabilillah. It is equipping people to defend the community, and people added to that, some of the scholars, people who are cut off on the way of Hajj. That's the most earliest discussions on this topic. Over time, and there's still old classical conversations, it's that what's the purpose of Fi Sabilillah? It is to defend the community. It is to protect the community. It is to ensure that the cause of God is ultimate for this community. And so very frequently in the classical discussions, scholarship came into this. As we've seen earlier, Islamic scholarship has always been seen as the cornerstone of our civilization. We are ultimately a civilization of letters, of knowledge, because that's what allows us, as we've been debating today, how to perceive, how to live in the world today. It gives us an orbit around which to understand ourselves as an ummah. So if there was bad scholarship, if it wasn't, like we said earlier, cultivated, excellent, brilliant, engaged, because we're empowering them, we all suffer, as your earlier question implied. So we have to empower good scholarship, empower people to learn and guide. So scholarship very frequently entered into fi sabilillah conversations. Even the Hanafis, who are the most restricted on poverty is the criteria, even in later Hanafism, there was very healthy debate. Should we give zakat to people who are not actually poor, but they want to free themselves up for Islamic scholarship, and they can't do it on their savings? Because if you free yourself up on your savings, after a while you have nothing. So they need to have some kind of stipend in order to study and serve. And so it was not a hidden opinion, it was quite an avid debate, had many supporters in later Hanafi school, that you can give zakat to students of sacred knowledge who are not poor. And so this is the idea. Scholarship was always in that region, basically. And in the contemporary debate, then this is what's been expanded. And it's been expanded for a particular reason that didn't need it in the pre-contemporary period, which was that before this current moment or the modern era, Islamic institutions were very well funded through awqaf and other things. Islamic history was a history of social institutions powered by community, not by taxation. And so a lot of our questions don't arise in that economic setup. In our setup, we have impoverished institutions. Not only is it hard for me to free myself up if I don't have huge savings or great investments or something, I want a stipend if you want me to do public service. But then institutions, how are you going to train people? How are you going to run these things? You don't have enough donors. And then if you want to do that the rest of your life, you're begging people with the bow and these kinds of questions. Very real, very relevant, very needed. And so there's been a lot of lots of answers. And you'll generally find scholars have been permissive of facilitating scholarly endeavors through zakat. Some fiqh councils just allow it without any condition. So they'll say, for example, look at Darul Iftars in various parts of the Arab world, certainly, or Majami' fiqh fatwas. They'll say, well, if it's a non-Muslim country, this is a da'wah institution, they'll create scholars, they'll create students, they'll inform Islam, they'll protect Islam, they'll preserve Islam. They can take zakat as fi sabilillah, and they don't differentiate who's it going to, is the student poor, is the student rich, what's the code. They just say the institution needs to be served. There's not a rare fatwa. You'll find it in various Darul Fatwas coming out of this. Even in the Indian subcontinent, which again, very restrictive frameworks, in the 19th century, they had a lot of really interesting fatwas to facilitate the support of Darul Ulooms. Because Darul Ulooms, these sort of centers of learning, became bastions of preserving Islamic practice in general. Leadership and imams and scholars and practice and so on. They were just hubs of almost practice, not just scholarship. And that very creative debates in the 19th century in India. Some scholars, very well-known Deobandi scholars, for example, some of them said, the man who goes village to village collecting funds to run the Darul Uloom, he is an Amil, he can take a cut of zakat just to support himself while traveling. That's quite creative. We don't talk like that nowadays in our Darul Uloom spaces. But the bottom line is, everyone found a creative way to facilitate educational institutions. Some people said, you pay it to the student and take it back as a fee. Some people said, make the student an agent. Some people said, just pay the institution. It's okay, don't worry about the technicalities. So there is leeway. It's very healthy. It's a large history of the last 150 years. It's not like one person is a fringe voice on this. And then if you allow this, then because we're getting a more mature community, We're discussing other questions now, like media engagement. That's like important, and that's important, and that's important. So what I'm saying is, right now the questions are building on a layer of questions which by and large have been supported, which is about education.
So, sorry to interrupt, Sheikh. There's a conflict of interest arguably here, right? Because the only thing that there's quite a lot of strong views on, this is fine, is scholars saying, yeah, scholarship. Everything else, we're still thinking about it. One could argue it's a conflict of interest, or more charitably, one could say, this is what we know best. We definitely are doing good stuff, and therefore we're going to allow it. It's just that we don't know about other stuff.
Yeah, I can't answer that. I see exactly what you mean. From one point of view, there's historical precedent. These are ancient debates.
Which could arguably be still...
Conflict, I'm not going to say exactly, because in those times, first of all, there's no issue with the military or the Hajj. It's not like we're reinterpreting.
Yeah.
And it's clear that scholarship is not the same as another kind of endeavor. And you have an environment of a privately supported public institution. So I'd still say no, I wouldn't call it completely. But in our time, I understand what you mean, because people need to run their Darul Ulooms or equivalents. And they also happen to be scholars.
Yeah.
And Zakat is a form of reliable annual funding. And so you're right, there's a happy marriage of sorts between... so I understand what you're saying.
Because the same scholars are the ones who would be very tight on, this is the boundary.
It goes back to your other question of precedent, which we discussed earlier, which is when things have been going for a while, there's a sort of safety in them. And you bring a new angle like media, which hasn't been discussed for 150 years, let's say. It's being discussed for like 10 years. We're quite a new community. Media engagement is new for us.
Yeah.
We've got youngsters who've now become middle-aged in media, and they've done well for themselves.
Yeah.
But then to say funding with zakat, tying zakat to media, it's a really new question. It's not 100 years, it's not, I wouldn't be surprised, it's not even 10 years. Then we're in the same question of crypto, then, oh no, what is this, what is it not? And so we're in that cutting edge, it will be resolved. Your question is fair on what you've said, it will be resolved, but it's new. And it's building off of what I think has a long precedent, which is supporting scholarship, which was built on supporting a military or helping Islam effort. And because it's built on, I think you'll find a lot of very supportive fatwas.
Yeah.
But what are they paying for? That's where there's a bit of technicality in that.
Sure. But do you think that we shouldn't... I feel like we sometimes get too caught up about the technicalities because it's a messy world. And one could say that actually modern day warfare is actually mostly fought online. It's fought in the ideas realm. And it is about deterrence, and it's not really about the actual battle. If we go into the technicalities, even hundreds of years ago, one could argue, okay, what about is this buckle on his in his armor technically part of what he needs for his, and you could get into the technicalities there as well. But I feel like people kind of understood it. All right, we could take the same approach here and say, look, there are ahlul, social media or like this realm. They are going to be our warriors in this space. Let's just trust them to go out and do their thing.
Thank you very much. I think just one thing that comes to mind as you're talking, which is just there's a fundamental technicality of, are you paying a human being or are you paying an abstract entity? So as you know, in the Islamic sacred law, there are no abstract entities. There's no corporations, there's no, even government's not abstract. If the guy on top does something wrong, you take the guy on top to court. There's no government that had politics, people. Now, this itself is a modern conversation. Should we have corporate fatwas, right? So, but at least you have to understand, we're coming from a conversation which believes in human responsibility. So a lot of these questions, but like I did say, you will find, I think from some majami' fiqhi of Jeddah, I think it was, found some fatwas of theirs from 20 years ago, just paying an Islamic center without worrying about the recipient. I found fatwa of Awqaf Kuwait saying similar. So you have some precedent in this modern debate. But by and large, that's a fundamental question. Because if I'm paying an individual, then it's more about the question of public service. That's why it's almost like the Amil or fi sabil, like they overlap. Because the idea of the Amil is, I freed up my time and my effort for public service. I deserve some public stipend for that. And fi sabilillah is similar. I freed up my time for public service, and the service I'm doing is serving the cause of the ummah, serving the religion, bringing dignity to the cause of God, or serving the cause of God. And once you get to that point, and you can agree to that point, and then at that stage it's just, well, what does it mean? You just have to just define it, and that's the only point of the debate. Scholarship, why is scholarship okay for that? Okay, so why not media then? Why not philosophy then? Why not political something? So then that's just the argument is just the avenue. You've already got past the barrier of helping a person who's freed themselves up, for example. One last clause is, does it have to be poor or not? And there's that debate we've already discussed. When you go to institutional support, which I say there is present in the last 100 years or so with the madrasas, I find that a little bit more fiddly, because it goes back to another framework we've had, which was, are you representing a Muslim public? Are you representing a small group of funders or your own money? If you're representing Muslim public, I'm suspicious of institutional support blanket, because it's very easy to inflate. It's very easy for someone to say, for example, I want a nice living. I'll just make a project. I'll get zakat and I'll play. It's like government. Like there's funding available. Let's make a project. And then people, they go into these spaces. They inflate their salaries because the funding's available. So you charge your wage based on the funding. That idea I don't like personally. I think it's very open to inflation, abuse, not abuse. Just abuse of the privilege, and it just needs a lot of control. I don't like that space personally. But if it's to do with a controlled group of funders, so for example, I'm starting a college or some media thing, and I say, well, these are the fatwas if you want to pay me zakat, but I'm not a zakat institution. I'm a project. I'm looking for funding in general. And people will come to me, can I pay you zakat? That's what normally happens. Right? So then I'll say, well, you can pay zakat based on this fatwa, that fatwa, and then you can decide. So that's what I prefer for people to do. Set up the projects. You're not a zakat institution. You're a media monitoring project, for example. Let people fund you. And if they want to give you zakat, you say, well, this is the debate. This is the fatwas that, for example, we follow. And if you agree, then pay us. Then you get out of the issue. That's all that comes to mind.
Wabn al-Sabil, anything to say on that? Because I want to talk a little bit about NZF before we wrap up.
Ibn Sabil is obviously your traveler. The important thing in terms of the ethic, why is this in the verse? It's just to remind people again about this notion of community and ummah, that there'll be people in our midst, we don't know who they are, we don't know them, we don't recognize them, we don't speak their language, and the Quran is very concerned about these people. That you can't build community in your cliques. You have to build community for everyone. That's why I said the fundamental ethic, we have to make sure it pierces through all of our messaging, is the sanctity of ummah, the sanctity of belonging. If somebody belongs to the ummah, then we have to care for them. The slaves might be forgotten, and these refugees might be forgotten, but they're part and parcel of our story because they're in our midst. And that's all I'll say about this. In terms of the classical discussion though, classical discussion was, they're from somewhere where they have money, for example, but they've come to a place where they're cut off and alienated. So they typically say, give them enough that they can travel back. Or if they're not going to, or at least they can settle, or they can get on their own 2 feet. In our common discourse, obviously refugees, I would say, are the most common people who've fled businesses, fled this, fled that, come and become strangers, and we have to embrace them as a community and have support for them.
Sheikh, you are CEO of NZF. We're going into Ramadan. What's the story? What's the game plan?
Okay, so thank you for bringing me back to NZF, because I've talked so much about so many things. My concern is people will think, is that what NZF is trying to do? And it's a lot of stuff. But you would have seen a thread throughout, which was, I said, if it's a communally representative project, it should have caution. If not, then not.
Yeah.
So my priority for NZF is in each of the words of the title. My goal for NZF is, it is the national body for zakat. My goal is that every Muslim across the United Kingdom has no barrier to feeling represented and a part of this zakat pot. For that purpose, and for all the things that have been on the thread since we've started, my goal for NZF, when it comes to engaging with fiqh and fatwas, is we will follow positions that our community accepts. Positions that are, if you like, non-controversial, non-strange, any of the things we've been discussing. Because my goal for NZF is, no one should feel a barrier to participating. It's a community, Muslim community project, and its real purpose and power is to lay a foundation, if I use the literal meaning of foundation, the foundation for us across the United Kingdom to really feel connected to a network of support because we are believers. It's about really creating a sense of ummah, belonging, you could say dignity. I want every Muslim in this future, if you like, is to be able to sleep at night thinking, I'm really grateful I'm a Muslim because I'm part of a community that's there for me. And so I think that's the power of zakat working. The other thing I'd say that's really important to me, which we haven't touched on at all actually, it's the question of localization. So classical fiqh has, across the 4 Sunni schools, has an emphasis on localizing zakat. But localizing in the classical fiqh is not about nation states. Those are modern sort of constructs. Localization in classical fiqh was about your area, your city, the region around your city. The classical fiqh from the classical schools was just only debating whether it's a fard or a sunnah to localize zakat. No one debated that localization is part of the correct way to do zakat. It was just, what's the status of it? When can you transport zakat overseas? So localization, therefore, is not within just a construct of the nation state. It's that we really have to feel, as a pillar of our faith, responsible for our community. And so what I'd like NZF to really be behind is creating what I would almost call a movement within the United Kingdom, where Muslims feel empowered and informed to care for their communities. A future where, wherever we live, in whatever city, whatever postcode, we have people in our midst who are experts, who know who are the Muslims in our area, what are their needs, and those people are empowered to support and to make the support reach where it's required. So the idea that because the idea of localizing zakat, it creates this notion, I call it the neighbor in faith. The idea that the Muslim who's near you has a greater right through nearness. We've forgotten that. So we're trying to create a National Zakat Foundation then, is to really work with community leaders, community institutions, so they can be hubs for educating zakat, distributing zakat, and really building localized, a real sense of belonging. With that, we're working with mosque partners to empower them to distribute zakat at grassroots level. We are starting a Zakat Champions program. If you go to nzf.org.uk/Zakat Champions, just take part. You might educate if you wish, you can inform, you can pass on information, you can fundraise, you can train to support people in a zakat distribution hub. The point is, it's the community's project, and it is about moving the community so we all feel a part of our zakat system. That's the direction of travel, and I do ask people to take part because we can only do it together, basically.
Brilliant. No, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. And we probably should wrap up. And I should also, caveat that we have gone into a huge amount of very kind of academic and quite technical stuff. A lot of it driven by my self-interest in lots of these areas. But I think the reality of the practical zakat on the ground, particularly what I've seen from NZF, is it's not about these frontier lands and these kind of academic debates. It's actually really simple. This person needs help. this person is poor, these people need to be uplifted. There's so much of that needs to be done, and that NZF does, as opposed to everything that we've discussed here today.
I think it's important what we discussed, because like I said, the sacred law gives us a vision, an ethic, an ethos, a direction of travel. So we all need this in mind. What I will say is that if we don't get the foundation right, then our future conversations might only stay academic.
Yeah.
And I think getting the community to really buy into a nationwide Zakat project, I think can lay a strong foundation for us. The other thing is that poverty in our community is far greater than many people realize. We live in many of us live in very fortunate bubbles. We are the most impoverished faith community. We have in cost of living, many Muslims are in debt, skipping meals, just borrowing money to pay just basic bills. We have a lot of the refugee community come from Muslim lands. They've got very basic to very minimal support to survive. There's a lot of very basic poverty indicators we have to address. We've got Muslim youth joining gangs. There's just a lot of issues coming from basically the poverty. The other part is, looking to develop our economic empowerment part of our work, which is creating pathways for people to get employed, to be able to stand on their own two feet, and to make the cycle work as Zakat payers. The last thing I didn't mention though, as we are empowering communities, representing communities, moving funds to our Muslim community, we have a lot of information about Muslim needs and Muslim struggles. And we are going increasingly trying to develop our work in representing the Muslim community in public affairs forums, in policy forums, in media forums, because we have that oversight of where's the community at, what are their needs, and what are good wins with the wider community. Zakat doesn't have to be only inward facing. We have an ethos. We can benefit the wider community in conversations of how community projects are good for the modern struggling state world in which we currently inhabit, and just to represent. So I hope we're a space of Muslim where people can come, learn about the community, and feel that we are representing them in the national conversation.
Sheikh Sohail, Jazakallah khair for bearing with us. It's been an honor to have just got the chance to just grill you on all the random questions I have. Jazakallah khairan.
Jazakum khairan. Thank you so much. It's been very enriching. You've reminded me of things I've thought about and forgotten I had thought about. And also through the questioning, I think we've articulated things that it's been very useful and enriching for me as well. Jazakum khairan. Thank you very much indeed.